My great kingdom of Italy. This video is purely for entertainment and does not infringe on copyrights or laws. The rights to the novel and image belong to the original author. We do not claim ownership. Don't like waiting and want to listen to this fanfic in full now? Subscribe to our Patreon, where you'll find the best fanfics. Chapter 176. Reckless William. The negotiations with King Carlo of Romania went very smoothly. Carlo invested 32 million lire in his private capacity to obtain 49% of the shares of the newly formed Romanian Petroleum Company, while King Carlo invested 11 million lei in the name of the royal family. 1 lei equals 1 lira. The Romanian government invested land, policies and 1,800 lei, and the two parties obtained 51% of the controlling stake in the new company. Point of course, as Carlo does not control the Romanian Petroleum Company, 65% of the oil and products produced by the company in the future must be shipped to Italy. Of course, if Italy cannot eat it, it can be put on the market. Point of course, it now appears that this condition is simply to find sales for the new Romanian Petroleum Company. As for the future, Romanians will know that this plan is terrible. As for now, Romanians are smiling. After negotiating with the Romanians about oil development, Carlo then attended the coronation ceremony of Frederick III. There was nothing good to say. Compared with William I's enthronement in the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles, the scene when Frederick III ascended the throne in his own palace was much smaller. It was similar to Carlo's coronation ceremony, but the guests were heavier, and of course the oath was taken by the crown prince. Others also acquiesced to this. After all, it is a bit too much to let a person who cannot speak. However, there was still a trace of worry in the lively scene. That is, the new emperor's condition seemed a bit bad. Although Frederick III was neatly dressed and had heavy makeup on his face, it was difficult to see the emperor's condition clearly. But close observers could still see the tiredness in the new emperor's eyes. No one, except Carlo, would have imagined that the new emperor would die after only 3 months. The consensus view from the outside world is that no matter what Frederick III does, he can last at least a year and a half. Other than that, the entire enthronement scene is nothing interesting. King Carlo, please wait a moment. After the enthronement ceremony, when Carlo was about to follow the crowd and leave, an attendant stopped him. Anything? Facing Carlo's inquiry, the attendant told the reason. His Royal Highness the Crown Prince hopes that King Carlo will wait a moment. No problem. Carlo, led by his attendants, came to a small living room. After the attendant left, Carlo looked at the furnishings in the living room. Compared with the historical living room at home, it seemed a little inferior. Without letting Carlo wait any longer, William II pushed the door open and came in after a while. Carlo, I'm so sorry. I've been too busy recently and haven't seen you in person. William II, who entered us, had a smile on his face, and there was no trace of him being scolded by the Prime Minister after William I's funeral. Since William II didn't mention it, he wouldn't bother himself by saying it. It's nothing. I've experienced this kind of situation before. I'm totally busy and don't have any free time at all. Carlo's tone of voice reminded William II that this person had also experienced such a scene. I was so busy that I forgot about it. After a simple opening remarks, Crown Prince William stated his intention for letting Carlo stay. Carlo, I plan to send a naval delegation to Italy to inspect your country's navy and exchange experiences. By the way, no problem. I will let the navy take care of them. When faced with William II's words, Carlo agreed without hesitation. Every year the German Navy sends people to Italy for exchanges, which is not a big deal. By the way, who are you going to send? By some strange combination of circumstances, Carlo suddenly wanted to ask why William II brought it up at this time. This is Colonel Tirpitz, who was communicating with you. He will lead the team this time. William II's answer made Carlo become serious now. Since the father of the High Seas Fleet is coming, he must let Admiral Garlick receive him well. Moreover, William II's words also showed that his desire for a larger navy did not give up after being hit by the Prime Minister before, and he began to use roundabout methods. By the way, our country also has a group of army officers who hope to come to Germany for further study. It would be best to do an internship at your country's general staff headquarters, Karu. O is also a master who does not suffer for any reason. Since we receive your navy every year, then you should also receive our army, and hope to observe the operations of the German army general staff up close. That's no problem. I believe Marshal Moltke would really like his colleagues from Italy. Faced with Carlo's conditions, William II agreed without hesitation, without asking what the army thought. In fact, the German army has always been supportive of this, allowing talents from all over the world to apply for German military academies and even serve in the German army for a period of time. Don't think this is because the Germans are kind. This is all to expand their influence. Except for a few island countries or peninsula countries. The militaries of all countries basically rely on the army, and those who can come to Germany to study military affairs are at least talents. Such soldiers with German education will be good in every aspect. I feel a sense of affinity for Germany. This is the only way to increase your influence, and it is much more solid than other methods. So what reason did William II have to refuse? Even if it was to go to the general staff for an internship, that would be no problem. The people Carlo wanted to send to the German army for further training were mainly from the guards and the Marine Corps. He hoped to cultivate a group of senior officers who were both loyal to him and very capable. It can become the core force for controlling the army in the future. But this is a tangent. Now he is busy talking about improving Italian industry. By the way, Carlo, I want to ask, how did you deal with Prime Minister Caroli after you came to the throne? Carlo, who returned to the West Palace of Sands, looked normal, but he was very tired inside, because the questions asked by William II made him feel his impulsive and reckless side. But he had finally managed it, and now he just wanted to go back to his room and rest. But he gave up this idea after entering the hall, because Foreign Minister Boccona was waiting for him. His Majesty, seeing that Boccona, who was in charge of the negotiations, was waiting for him with the document in his hand, Carlo already had a guess. What? Are you done talking? The talks are almost over, and I feel this is the bottom line of Germany's requirements. Carlo took the document from his hand and started to read it. The Germans took a brief look at the conditions. They were exactly the same as before. They hoped that Italy could open up its colonies and receive the same treatment as Italy in terms of ship maintenance and supplies in the terms of exchange given below. It is very clear that the tariffs between the two countries will be raised to 21.5%. Your Majesty, I think this condition is very suitable. Faced with the Foreign Secretary's remarks, Carlo put it in his hand with a snap after reading it. In that case, let's agree according to these conditions. Also remind the Germans that we must not forget the technology we want. 2. Chapters. Updated Chapter 177 Convention of Constantinople. The train is speeding along the railway line, and the clanking sound of the wheels passing over the joints of the rails is continuous and powerful, like a lullaby that induces drowsiness. However, amidst the clanging sound, Carlo was not sleepy at all, because he was checking the results of this visit. That's right. The Italian delegation has already returned. After solving the colonial issue with Germany, nothing else will be a problem. The clear instructions from the German government allowed Italy to quickly complete negotiations with major companies. Sometimes I have to say that the Germans are doing a good job, because the technologies they brought back this time are very good. The barrel self-tightening technology was brought back from Krupp, the dye technology brought back from Farben Chemicals, the pharmaceutical technology brought back from Bayer, and various technologies brought by other companies. These technologies are urgently needed for the development of Italian industry. Of course, in addition to these, there are various other technologies. Carlo is reviewing these technologies, but what he calls a review is actually testing the results. Carlo was very satisfied with his visit to Germany. Although Germany forced Italy to open its colonies, the Germans did not treat them badly. All technologies were needed by Italy. Carlo looked at these documents selflessly, completely unaware of a figure appearing in front of him. Your Majesty, we are about to arrive in Rome. The voice of the captain of the guard came from beside him, asking Carlo to put down the documents in his hand. It's all coming home now. I almost forgot about it. After Putting down the document in his hand, Carlo turned to look at his captain of the bodyguard and rubbed his swollen eyes. There were only a few people in the carriage where Carlo was, so he didn't act so formal. After a while, the buildings of Rome appeared outside the window, and the speed of the train gradually slowed down. Of course, this also reminds passengers that the station is about to arrive. After the train stopped, the people on the platform who were responsible for greeting them immediately stepped forward, led by senior cabinet officials composed of Prime Minister Despertus and others. "Your Majesty, you have had a hard time visiting Germany this time." Facing the Prime Minister's greeting, Carlo immediately stepped forward to hold his hand and said, "It's nothing, it's all about working for Italy." When Carlo said this, the Prime Minister's hesitant expression caught his attention. "What's the matter, Prime Minister?" The French government sent a note hoping that our country would participate in negotiating a treaty on the Suez Canal. What? Facing the Prime Minister's words, Carlo was a little surprised because he had not received the news at all. Well, the Prime Minister didn't know this news for long. After France failed to win over Egypt in order to prevent the British from monopolizing the Suez Canal, it tried to unite other countries to force the British to make the Suez Canal a public canal open to other countries. Of course, in addition to inviting Italy, France has also extended invitations to other countries. Which countries are there? Germany, Austria-Hungary, Russia, Spain, the Netherlands, and the Ottomans are all countries that have a need for the Suez Canal. Just look at these countries. They all have colonies or huge interests in the East. Such a massive action is enough to illustrate the concerns of other countries about Britain's control of the Suez Canal. There is no way. This canal is too important to all countries, and no one wants this canal to be controlled by one of the countries. Even the British Empire, which is at its peak, cannot reassure other countries. After Carlo heard the Prime Minister's words, he thought for a moment and spoke. Then let the Ministry of Foreign Affairs respond to France's note and tell them that we in Italy are very happy with this. There is no way Italy's current overseas colonies need to pass through the Suez Canal. Since France is the organizer, why doesn't Italy participate? Even if the British want to respond to this, they should look to France. When Carlo answered, the Prime Minister and others breathed a sigh of relief. You must know that Carlo started his career as an anti-France, and being able to make him agree to this note from France also shows that the young king is not a brainless anti-France, but also has choices. By the way, does France have any conditions for negotiation this time? After leaving the train station, Carlo, who was sitting in the carriage, asked the Prime Minister who was sitting with him. The Prime Minister took out a thick stack of documents from the briefcase he carried with him and spoke. This is what France is proposing for the Suez Canal. After taking the document from the Prime Minister, Carlo began to read it. This document lists out sufficiently detailed terms as Article 1 states. The Suez Maritime Canal shall be freely open to all merchant ships or warships regardless of flag flying in times of war as in peacetime. The contracting parties therefore agree not to interfere with the free use of the canal in time of war as in time of peace. The canal should never be subject to blockades. This prevents the British from using the Suez Canal to threaten other countries, which is very important to all countries. In addition, as listed in the second item, the contracting parties consider the freshwater canal to be an integral part of the maritime canal and note the commitment of His Highness the Governor of Egypt to the International Suez Canal Company regarding the canal on the river. The contracting parties undertake not to interfere with the safety of the canal and its tributaries, nor to hinder the use of the canal. This is to prevent the Egyptians and the contracting parties from any sabotage activities on the canal. This is also for the benefit of all countries. Further, Article 3, the contracting parties undertake to respect the factories, installations, buildings, and works belonging to the maritime canal and the river canal. Article 4, according to the provisions of Article 1 of this treaty, the ocean canal serves as a free waterway during wartime, and should still be open to warships of belligerent countries. The contracting parties agree that there shall not be any act of war or hostility within the canal and its ports, and within a radius of 3 miles of these ports, or any act aimed at obstructing the free navigation of the canal, even if the Ottoman Empire is a belligerent point, unless there are special needs. Warships of the warring parties should not load or store military supplies in the canal and its ports. The above mentioned warships shall proceed through the canal as expeditiously as possible in accordance with the regulations in force, and shall not make any stop, except when necessary for official purposes. The warship shall not stay at its anchorage in port said, and SYNOPSIS for more than 24 hours, except in case of disaster. If you are in trouble, you must leave as soon as possible. There should be a period of 24 hours between the departure of a belligerent vessel from a port and the departure of an enemy vessel. Article 5. During wartime, the warring parties are not allowed to load or unload troops, arms or military supplies in the canal and its ports. However, if a sudden obstruction occurs in the canal, troops of no more than 1,000 people in detachment units and a corresponding amount of military supplies can be loaded and unloaded. These regulations are all to ensure the safety of the canal. These terms were very beneficial to Italy, but the negotiation lacked the British who actually controlled the Suez Canal, which made Carlo have some concerns about it, but he kept it in his heart and did not say it out. However, when he returned to the palace, he was interrupted by the visiting Minister of War, before he was eager to reunite with his family. Your Majesty, the Army's new rifle has been prototyped. Would you like to take a look? I'm in such a bad state today that I can only type one chapter. I also know that half of this chapter is filled with information. I'm sorry to all the book friends. All I can say is, I'm sorry. I'll make it up tomorrow when I get back to my normal state. I hope everyone won't be angry with the steamed buns. Chapter 178 M88 Carcano Rifle. The Borg Small Arms Testing Ground is the closest small arms testing ground to Rome. It is only 5 kilometers away from the city of Rome, and is one of the 8 weapons testing sites designated by the Ministry of War as a weapons testing ground just outside Rome. The Borg Proving Ground has always been responsible for the main testing tasks of the Army's small weapons. This time the inspection of the new rifle was also conducted at the testing ground. Your Majesty, this is a weapons testing ground established by our army in 1871. It was formerly a military camp in the Papal States. After the unification of Italy, considering that the environment here was very suitable for weapons testing, it was converted into a weapons testing ground. In the test site, General Sergeant, who is the Minister of War, is explaining the origin of the test site to Carlo. Beside the two people, a group of old men wearing military uniforms and general rank surrounded them, of course mainly around Carlo, who was the king. It is pitiful to say that a group of old generals wanted to use political means to resist Carlo's attempt to intervene in the army, but after searching for a long time, they could not find a significant ally. If you don't take this post, you will disappoint the generals. Since they could not find a significant ally, they had two choices. They would not have the courage to change the monarch, so releasing their goodwill to Carlo became a reasonable choice. However, even if they showed good intentions, these generals also had a sense of Italian pettiness, and they all used trivial things to fool Carlo. As for the vital military power, these old guys hold it tightly. Even the expired agreement to allow the Imperial Guard to exceed the size of 10,000 people has not been let go until now. You must know that the Marine Corps has expanded to 15,000 people. These old guys are like ostriches, burying their heads in the soil and pretending not to know. No matter how much he was fooled by things like inspecting weapons or inspecting the army, Carlo didn't say a word about the practices of these military leaders. Since the old guy dared to fool him, he didn't know who was fooling him. Of course, he is also very concerned about the next stage of the Italian Army's standard rifle. After all, it is related to the Army's combat effectiveness. As for why Carlo was not brought back from Germany, the predecessor of the Committee 1888 rifle, also called Morza 1888. Morza Company, made in Hanyang, which was famous in later generations, has nothing to do with me. If you hadn't been trying to fool people, you would have, dare it be a rifle that is not from our company, prefixed with Morza. On the one hand, Germany has not yet produced a prototype gun, and on the other hand, Italy does not like this German emergency standard rifle. Why do I say this? Because this gun is really a German emergency product. The bolt action was improved from the Austrian M1888 Mannlicher rifle by the Spandau arsenal. the magazine and the 5-round clip. Bullets must be loaded with a clip. The clip remains in the magazine and cannot be reloaded until it is fired, are also improved from the M1888 Mannlicher rifle. The barrel rifling is basically an imitation of the French Lebel 1886, and the new smokeless bullet is improved from the Swiss 7.92mm rimless bottleneck bullet. The reason Germany is so anxious is because France has developed the world's first small caliber military rifle using smokeless gunpowder. This rifle is far superior to the Mauser 71/84 rifle currently equipped in Germany in terms of lethality and ballistic performance. This will bring great tactical advantages to French infantry in terms of accuracy and range. Faced with France's suppression of itself on rifles, this immediately attracted great attention from the German military department. Under tremendous pressure, Germany immediately established a rifle testing committee. GPK's initial plan was just to improve the existing Mauser 71/84 rifle and replace the original 11mm black powder rifle cartridge with new smokeless powder and reduce the warhead. However, it was not until December 1887 that GPK suddenly realized that such modifications did not bring much progress and advantages, so they decided to combine the most advanced rifle designs available at the time. This hodgepodge of advanced designs is a Committee 1888 rifle. When the group of people arrived at the shooting range, a table had been prepared, with several unseen guns placed on it, and a very distinctive middle-aged man stood beside the table. Why do I say this? Because at first glance, I thought this person looked a bit like a yellow man. But after a closer look, I realized that he didn't look like that. Before Carlo could ask, General Saragut, the Minister of War, introduced him. Your Majesty, this is the chief firearms designer of our Turin arsenal, His Excellency Salvador Carcano. He is also the most outstanding firearms designer in our country. Following General Saragut's words, Carlo had an idea. It seemed that this man was the designer of the new rifle. Carlo did not wait for Carcano to come forward to greet him, but walked to him in 2 or 3 steps. Hello, Lord Carcano. I look forward enthusiastically to your work appearing in the hands of military soldiers. Facing Carlo's first words, Carcano obviously didn't react in time. Hello, Your Majesty. I'm very willing to see this day. Seeing that Carcano was a little nervous, Admiral Tapia, who was the equipment director, spoke. Carcano, let's introduce the new rifle first. Facing Admiral Tapia's general words of relief, Carcano immediately focused his energy on the state he was most familiar with. I saw him holding a rifle from the table and starting to explain. Your Majesty, please see, this is a new rifle I designed. The gun has a total length of 980mm and a weight of 3.2 kilograms. It uses a 550mm barrel and can fire rimless round nose rifle bullets. The effective range of the bullet is 600 meters, which allows soldiers to have sufficient shooting range. In addition, the gun uses a 6-round leakage clip, which can ensure that our soldiers have one more bullet firing time. It can be seen that this rifle is designed to cater to the Italian physique, so the weight and length have been reasonably divided. With Carcano's introduction, even Carlo, who was not a soldier, became interested. Let the soldiers try it. Facing Carlo's words, Admiral Saragut behind him nodded slightly, and several soldiers came over. They picked up their rifles and started shooting at the shooting target outside. On their side, several technicians holding notebooks and pens were taking various notes. Bursts of gunfire made the test site lively. The soldiers not only shot while standing, kneeling, or lying down, but sometimes they rolled their rifles on the ground, or threw them in the dirt, and then shot them. Pick it up and shoot to simulate the battlefield situation. There are good and bad aspects to these experiments, but they are all realistic representations of the various environments soldiers use them in. Carlo and the others waited until the shooting was completed before looking at the recorder. The report states that there were 5 new guns tested this time, and a total of 500 rounds of ammunition were fired. 3 of them jammed, and 1 was to activate the primer. In the shooting situation, the gun is better than the current one in our army. The Vitry rifle currently used meets the standards we have set, both in terms of rate of fire and accuracy. Facing The recorders report, everyone, including Carlo, had smiles on their faces, since this gun is good, how about equipping it on a small scale? This is what Carlo is saying, because judging from the use of the gun by the soldiers, they have already adapted to this gun. It seems that this gun has been tested many times. In this case, what else is there to say? I just went along with the flow and my favor was better when facing Carlo. The generals on the scene also nodded in agreement. Your Majesty, you are wise. Your Majesty, that makes sense. Then, do as your Majesty wishes. As the generals agreed one by one, it seemed that Carlo was the leader of the army. So amid all the compliments, Italy's new standard rifle was decided. According to past practice, the gun is called the M88 rifle, but conventionally, it is called the Carcano M88 rifle. There is another chapter before 12 o'clock. I will code it out. Chapter 179, Rome Bank Scandal. Carlo is still satisfied with the army's new generation standard rifle. Although it is not as good as several later rifles, considering the age, this gun can still be used for more than 10 years. Of course, it would be a bit excessive to use this rifle for half a century like in the previous life. Of course, we'll talk about the future later. The most important thing right now is the issue of production. Of course, as for the production of this gun, Carlo made everyone in the army ecstatic as soon as he opened his mouth. The production of 350,000 guns in 2 years almost changed the army. This made the military leaders think that the method worked. But only Carlo himself knew that this was to improve the combat effectiveness of the Italian army. After returning to the palace from the Bork experimental site, Carlo began to devote himself to busy work. After all, he had been away for more than half a month and had accumulated a lot of work. Not to mention some technologies purchased from Germany, which need to be absorbed by Italian factories. But it seemed that God just didn't want to do what he wanted. A few days later, a piece of news made Carlo unable to sit still. The news came from the banking industry, as the president of the Bank of Rome, Tana Loggia, withdrew 37.4 million lire from the Bank of Rome with double the interest payment. What he did was discovered by a member of parliament. When this member of parliament went to the Bank of Rome to do business, he accidentally saw the president and asked his friend to leave with a box full of banknotes. So after the congressman stopped it, the case was exposed. This is true and shows the extent of Mr. Teneriffa's audacity. Such a huge amount made Carlo furious. What to do with Teneriffa and his friends? In the office, Carlo looked at the Prime Minister in front of him and asked the Prime Minister how to deal with it. Facing the angry Carlo's question, Depretis, as the Prime Minister, hesitated and said repeatedly, "Your Majesty, be careful when dealing with Teneriffa." Why? Carlo was a little surprised by the Prime Minister's answer. Because logically, shouldn't this matter be dealt with seriously? Are there any other officials who dare to cover up the president of the Bank of Rome at this time? Seeing Carlo with a surprised look on his face, Prime Minister Depretis decided to tell the whole story. After thinking for a while, it was during the Prime Minister's explanation that Carlo understood why this case should be treated with caution. Because the handling of Tana Loggia is not just a matter of corruption. If this matter is exposed, everyone in the Italian banking industry will be implicated. The public will definitely not think that this is just a problem committed by the president of the Bank of Rome, and will demand a thorough investigation of the entire banking industry. And this is the most terrible thing, because the current Italian banking industry cannot withstand thorough investigation, which involves a big landmine currently placed under the Italian government, the overissuance of currency. In fact, in addition to borrowing debt, the Italian government also asked banks to secretly overissue currency to relieve its financial pressure. In addition, the withdrawal of French capital from Italian banks also plays a major factor. After relations between the two countries soured, the French withdrew their capital. This forced the Bank of Italy to find ways to issue more currency in order to avoid bankruptcy. So the combination of several factors resulted in banks overissuing a lot of currency. According to estimates by the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Finance, these overissued currencies currently amount to 3.14 billion lire. If this mine is exploded, the situation we will face will be that Italy's national finances will soon go bankrupt. Therefore, dealing with the greedy President Tanalogia is not the key, but how to maintain the credibility of the Italian currency. You must know that it is very easy to destroy currency credit, just keep issuing currency, but it is extremely difficult to establish currency credit. At present, the Italian fiscal revenue is only more than 1.4 billion lire a year, and this extra currency is more than the Italian fiscal revenue in 2 years. Faced with the Prime Minister's words, Carlo fell silent. He is no longer a fool. Years of handling government affairs have taught him how difficult it is to maintain Italy's development. This thunder can not only destroy his previous achievements, but also destroy Italy's domestic development. It was a drag for 7 or 8 years with such serious consequences. Even Carlo, as a king, would not dare to take action easily. We can only find a way to slowly and carefully dismantle this landmine buried under Italy. Then, what good solutions does your government have? Carlo asked this sentence, which meant that he bowed to reality. Because it is impossible not to bow down. In this era of chasing each other, the Italian economy, which has just started to pick up, is like a bud and cannot withstand any wind and rain, let alone a financial crisis like this. Carlo's opening made the Prime Minister breathe a sigh of relief. He was most afraid of the young king. No matter what he did, the only consequence would be that he and the cabinet would resign. Because the blame will only fall on himself and his cabinet ministers, and of course the more important Italian economy will suffer a heavy blow. According to the government's idea, let the president of Tenerife cough out the money and then leave for physical reasons. After hearing the Prime Minister's words, Carlo became somewhat silent. That's it. This is the only way to do it. I have asked the congressman to stop promoting Tenerije's affairs. We cannot act rashly now. This will be a disaster. Carlo was a little dissatisfied with the Prime Minister's words. We need to strengthen financial regulation and let those banks know that the government is watching them. But this is the focus we need to do in the future. But this matter must be suppressed now. Of course he knew what Prime Minister Depretis meant. If the dam is leaking, the gap needs to be plugged first. The issues of strengthening the dam and holding those responsible can be dealt with later. The primary purpose must be clear. Then, just follow the government's approach and do it. After Carlo replied, he sat in his chair and fell into deep thought. In this situation, the Prime Minister also knew that the king was not feeling well, and he was actually not feeling well either. Your Majesty, I take my leave. Wait a minute. Regarding the king's sudden call to him, Prime Minister Depretis turned around and asked, Your Majesty, is there anything else? Carlo said with a serious face, this matter must not be exposed. I see. Depretis said this, then thought about it and continued, if exposed, I will resign with the cabinet. After the Prime Minister left, Carlo called the Chief Chamberlain. Send a message and ask Nightingale to come. As you command, Your Majesty. Although the government did not dare to deal with the president of the Bank of Rome because of concerns about financial problems, Carlo could only use some small means. An hour later, in a secret room in the palace, Carlo spoke to an ordinary looking man. Mr. Tenerife, the president of Roman Bank, I heard that his health is very bad. Can he last until a year? Your Majesty, he probably won't be able to survive. I heard that he likes to fish at the beach. The sea is very dangerous. Carlo was very satisfied with this answer and nodded. Go ahead. Chapter 180 National Bank of Italy. Although the secret review of Tanalogia continues, the former president of the Bank of Rome has no room for resistance. Because an individual cannot fight against state power unless he is a madman or an anarchist. But then again, how could he be in such a powerful position as the president of the Bank of Rome? Therefore, in order to protect himself, Tenerife had to issue a statement claiming that he was suffering from an illness and had to step down from his responsibilities as president and go home to recuperate. Then he spit out the money he had embezzled, got the government's decision to let him go, and was ready to go home and spend the rest of his life in peace. As for finding a new job, it is simply too difficult for Tanalogia, who has served as president of a large bank. Don't think about it for banks in Italy. As for banks in other countries, who would want a sick person to hold such a prestigious position as president. So he had no other option but to go home. As for the government, after the smooth disposal of Tenerife, the danger of landmine explosions has been temporarily eliminated. Of course, the lessons learned this time are too profound. In order to prevent this situation, an inspection of the banking and financial industry is also essential. Subsequently, the government sent various supervisory teams and began to conduct inspections of various banks. Both state-owned banks and private banks were within the scope of supervision. These supervision teams include capable financial insiders, astute financial reviewers, and experienced supervisors. That's right, in order to prevent the supervision team from colluding with the bank's internal affairs, each team has a varying number of supervisors. Faced with such a large-scale attack by the government, the banking industry suddenly burst into mourning, and the large number of supervisors made banking practitioners howl. Under the rummaging through of these supervisory teams, various banks had a lot of problems. You simply don't know if you don't check it, and you will be shocked if you check it. From minor problems such as illegal lending, to self-stealing, and even money and power transactions, beauty transactions, etc., all show how unscrupulous banks lack supervision. The government also provides various solutions to the problems that arise in these banks. Issues that may cause bank turmoil are handled with caution. For those problems that do not cause these situations, it is necessary to deal with them with heavy hands. Although this seems a bit like someone who dares to swat a fly, but dare not swat a tiger. But in the current situation, this is the only thing the government can do. Of course, those violators who were found to have problems were all kicked out of the bank and would not be able to work in the bank for the rest of their lives. While the government was rectifying the banking industry, Carlo, as the monarch, was not idle either. Although the government is currently taking a strong crackdown, he knows that this only treats the symptoms and not the root cause. After a while, the bugs inside the bank will reappear. This is the same as catching corruption. It is a long-term task. And he planned to use the most powerful tool for regulating banks in later generations and put a shackles on these banks, lest they think they could show off their power again after avoiding the limelight. Your Majesty, did you prepare this in Carlo's office? Tedula, the finance minister, asked in surprise. Because of this summons, he did not expect that the king would suddenly come up with a plan to supervise banks. In fact, not only him, but also the prime minister on the side, did not expect it. No, it doesn't matter. This is the method I prepared after consulting with several experts in the financial and banking industry. When asked by the Minister of Finance, Carlo did not dare to take credit. He was self-aware. How could he make such a plan with his little financial knowledge? And he was right. He really found several experts from famous financial banks to do it. He just proposed the method and the expert team was responsible for improving it. What the Chancellor of Finance sees in his hands is the final customized product. The reason why the finance minister should read it first, rather than the prime minister, is that this plan will take away a lot of power from the Ministry of Finance. Although this newly established department will also be under the jurisdiction of the Ministry of Finance, it is still separated by one layer. Yes, what Carlo prepared was a central bank. There are also central banks in Europe, such as the Bank of England, the Deutsche Reichsbank, etc. However, these central banks are gradually being transformed into central banks, and Carlo plans to skip the crude central banks of various countries and directly use the Chinese central bank, which has the strongest control in future generations, as a template. Of course, he knew there weren't that many, but weren't they experts? Just ask them for professional knowledge. So in Carlo's plan, the central bank is not just a bank within a bank, but a financial department with administrative responsibilities. From formulating financial policies and development strategic plans, to drafting relevant laws and administrative regulations, improving relevant operating rules and systems of financial institutions, formulating and implementing monetary policies, and even managing the treasury, etc. They can be regarded as functional departments in charge of finance. Most of these responsibilities were previously handled by the Ministry of Finance. So in the face of Carlo's plan, Tedula, as the finance minister, definitely has something to say. Your Majesty, it may not be appropriate to put so many functions in one bank. Don't blame the Chancellor for making a fuss about this, because it is unprecedented for a bank to be in charge of a country's finances. Facing the words of the finance minister, Carlo smiled and said, "Your Excellency Tedula, you have also seen that this is not just a bank, but a department. However, this department has some characteristics of a bank, so I think it should still be called a bank. Of course, if you don't like it, then we can change its name." Although Carlo was using a questioning tone, who was serious, and who was the fool at that time, and Tedula was certainly not a fool, he could still understand the firm meaning of the king's words. Of course, it was not easy for him to be the finance minister during this period, because the mess in the banking industry had greatly reduced his prestige within the government. He would not do that to stand up to the king for those worm-infested banks. Although there are many powers to be separated, the main responsibilities of the Ministry of Finance remain. So under Carlo's Majesty, the finance minister was quickly defeated. As for the prime minister, he will not object to the emergence of this department to supervise banks. The only thing that makes me a little unhappy is that this method was actually proposed by the king and not by the government itself. This makes him feel that he has been neglecting his duties recently. If this continues, what will be the prestige of the government? It will become the king's yes man. Since everyone had no objections, the proposal to form a central bank was decided jointly by the government and the king. Under such circumstances, this newly formed bank will mainly supervise banks in Italy, whether they are foreign owned, private, or state owned. They will all be under its supervision. In addition, the right to print money is also owned by the bank. Except for this bank, other banks are not allowed to issue currency, whether it is metal coins or banknotes. They can only be responsible for printing. Of course, there are other functions, such as managing the treasury, formulating policies, etc., which I will not describe one by one. The newly formed bank was named the National Bank of Italy by Carlo. Although this was a government-owned bank, that was the name Carlo wanted to call it. Of course, establishing the bank will not happen overnight, but before that, the government can still deter these banks. Chapter 1 today. Chapter 181 Inventory. The Bank of Naples is one of Italy's large state-owned banks. It was founded in 1804. It was originally formed by the government of the Kingdom of the Two Sicilies, after integrating several domestic banks to form the Bank of Naples with the meaning of a central bank. However, after the unification of Italy, the Bank of Naples was nationalized. Over the next 2 decades, the Bank of Naples also grew along with Italy's economic development. At present, the bank has 13 branches and more than 200 outlets in Italy, with total assets reaching 241 million lire. It is one of the few large state-owned banks in Italy. The Venice branch of the Bank of Naples is among the top 3 branches of the bank, ranking among the best in terms of revenue, profits, deposits, etc. Therefore, employees of the Venice branch have a sense of pride. However, during this period, the cold winter has arrived for bank employees, making even the top 3 employees of the Venice branch no longer proud, because the cold winter is about to arrive for them. Calibali is neatly dressed, and his hair is meticulous, because his job requires him to maintain a good appearance. As usual, he looked in the mirror at the employee in trance, then opened the door, and walked in. Looking around, there is something unusual in the hall today. There are no customers at all, while the employees are whispering in groups. He frowned when he saw such a scene, and couldn't help but cough. The familiar coughing sound startled the employees who were chatting together. They turned around, and knew who was coming, so they all dispersed and returned to their posts. They all showed their skilled smiles, and were ready to face the possibility arriving customers to make them so well trained. In addition to the strict requirements of their immediate boss Calibali, they also have a salary that is much higher than that of other industries. Generally speaking, the number of jobs in banks is 25% higher than that in other industries, so this has also caused bank jobs to become a hot commodity. As long as any bank is short of staff, a large number of applicants can fill the recruiter's room. Of course, this needs to be added. It is limited to large banks and private banks. Because of these 2 types of banks, the former is able to use the power in its hands, while the latter has higher salaries and higher requirements. But these are of no use to Calibali, because he is just the lobby manager, and it is not his turn. to have a lucrative job. The credit department and the securities department are the two departments where there is a lot of money. If you want to get in, you need more than just ability point, of course. For Carlo, the lobby manager with a monthly salary of 380 lire is also very good to him. This would allow his family to live a somewhat decent life, so he would not choose to leave unless it was absolutely necessary. But in the current environment, he was thankful that he didn't enter these two departments because they were the hardest hit areas now. I heard that at the head office, these two departments collapsed. Only 48% of the people in the credit department were retained. The rest were either fired, retired due to illness, or arrested. It was like being hit by a tornado. It was a mess. The securities department is better, with 53% of people staying. However, there are fewer people with problems there, but the problems are more serious. There are very few dismissals and medical withdrawals, and basically everyone is taken away. Such a large scale disaster shows the seriousness of the current problems in the Italian banking industry. However, this issue has nothing to do with Carlo, because he is just the lobby manager, just as Carlo was patrolling his workplace to see if his subordinates were slacking off. An internal employee found him. Manager Carlo, the president has something to ask you. Faced with the summons from the branch president, Carlo naturally did not dare to neglect and immediately hurried upstairs. After knocking on the door 3 times, the president's voice came from the door. Who? Carlo quickly said. President Burnett, it's me, come in. Facing the president's words, Carlo immediately opened the door and came in. President, are you looking for me? When Carlo said this, he discovered that he was not the only one in the president's office. On the long sofa opposite, 3 men dressed in obviously different clothes from the bank were sitting on the president's office opposite. The president, who was sitting on the boss's chair, seemed to be overheated and kept wiping the sweat on his forehead with a handkerchief. As if Carlo was a savior. Before he could ask, President Burnett stood up as if his but was on fire and introduced the 3 people to him with a smile on his face. These 3 guests are from the head office. They are Commissioner Mitchell, his assistant Mr. Edson, and Mr. Zapata. The 3 of them need an old employee who is familiar with our bank to be responsible for showing them all the information about the branch to conduct a review. So I asked you to come over. I have been working at the Nile branch for more than 8 years, and I believe that I know enough about the bank to be qualified for this job. Carlo didn't know what to say because of the president's words. He was just the lobby manager and his knowledge was limited. However, when the president turned his back to the 3 visitors and faced himself, he winked. I had no choice but to bite the bullet and agree to it for the sake of my own job. No problem, just leave it to me, President. After saying this, Carlo showed the spirit of serving big customers and walked in front of the 3 of them. I will serve the 3 of you next. What do you think? The other 2 did not speak, and Commissioner Mitchell, who was sitting in the middle, smiled. Well, let's ask Carlo to lead the way. Our time is limited, and we must speed up. This way please. After waiting for Carlo to leave with the 3 of them, President Burnett looked over and saw that they were really gone. He immediately closed the door and locked it specially. Then he picked up the phone, dialed a number he knew, and waited anxiously. Hey, who is that? When a familiar voice of inquiry came from the receiver, President Burnett immediately shouted, Zeman, it's me, I'm Burnett. Burnett, what's the matter? The people sent by the supervision team are ahead of schedule. You must pay back the money in advance, otherwise I will be sent to prison. But it will take me 3 days to get the money here. I don't have the money. The answer on the other end of the phone made President Burnett furious, and he said with a blush, I don't care about these reasons. If I don't get it back by tomorrow morning, I will be out of luck, and you won't be able to run away either. After saying these harsh words, Burnett slammed the microphone onto the stand. These 3 damn inspectors arrived early, completely disrupting their plans. Now they must find a way to get back the money they released. What method should be used? Burnett, you can do it. This thing won't be difficult for you. Believe in yourself. Yes, you can definitely do it. While President Burnett was thinking of a solution, Calibali had already brought them to the archive room. He pointed to the bundles of documents in the room and said, "This is the existing information left behind by our branch." Commissioner Mitchell, who started the conversation, smiled and said, "Excuse me, we will do it ourselves next." "Don't you want me to stay and explain it to you?" "I do not need it, thank you." After Calibali left, Commissioner Mitchell looked at the large bundle of information. "There's definitely something wrong with that." Governor Burnett Edson expressed his judgment. Confronted with Edson's words, another deputy spoke up. "It's obvious right away. We need to find evidence to take it down." Mitchell glanced at the two deputies, then pointed to the archived documents. "I believe we caught them off guard. This requires us to find out all kinds of clues and then remove these borers." No problem. Chapter 180. To the death of the Kaiser. The government's rectification of the banking and financial industries is in full swing. While bank employees were in dire straits, a new bank quietly opened its doors in a high-rise building on Polka Street. The name of this bank seems to have a lot of background. The National Bank of Italy. Who dares to name it like this? You can tell at a glance that the background is not small. Isn't this obvious? We can use the words Italy and country. It is not a bank controlled by the government, so this cannot be done. And this newly built bank is indeed different. They actually don't take deposits. Even if someone tried to inquire about the bank's business, they were persuaded to leave by the staff who said they were worth 258,000 yuan. Tell them directly that the bank does not handle public-facing businesses such as deposits and withdrawals. Curious people who were persuaded to leave, faced with such a result, if they hadn't seen the scary name of the bank, they would have spit in their mouths. "How dare you do this to me? You will be bankrupt sooner or later." Well, this bank, which is very unfamiliar to the public, has caused shock in the industry because this financial management institution with the name of a bank, which is both a bank and an institution, has been established, and it will definitely be their leader in the future. Boss. Many things in the future will depend on the bank's attitude, which makes many people feel uncomfortable. That's right. It's just discomfort, not opposition. Anyone who dares to object to the current situation and wants to develop business in Italy must abide by its laws. Even those who cross the river must give face to the government and the National Bank that pushed it to the front in Italy. Therefore, although the National Bank of Italy has a low reputation in front of the public, it is famous in the banking industry. Of course, how long this reputation can last depends on the next actions of the National Bank of Italy. Only by letting other banks feel its energy can it be made to behave accordingly. Tom Mettiles, the bank's first president, was well aware of this. However, he is not at all anxious about how the National Bank of Italy will appear now, because he has more important things to solve. Sitting in his perfectly located office on the third floor, Mettiles was looking at a document carefully. The light aroma from the wooden furniture, mixed with a bit of paint, makes the office smell a little nice. The clock on the wall is ticking, and people can't help but want to indulge in it, especially with the emerald green trees outside the window and the calls of unknown birds. Everything seems so quiet and pleasant. Mettiles sat in his office and turned a deaf ear to this, not even interested in looking up. What is it that makes Mettiles so entranced? In fact, it's nothing. It's just about the progress of the construction of 13 branches of the National Bank of Italy in Italy. Some people who don't understand may ask why Mettiles is so dedicated to the construction of branches. This question is very simple, because the construction of branches is related to the execution ability of the National Bank of Italy. Many policies will change from beneficial to harmful because of the lack of execution. Having served as a bank executive before and later entering the treasury, becoming second only to the Chancellor of the Exchequer and several senior deputy officials, Mettiles certainly knew what the first shot would be like and how important it was to him. In fact, on the first day he learned that he would become the National Bank of Italy, Mettiles already had specific plans. He wants to make the bank famous in the financial banking industry, and at the same time, let other banks and financial institutions know that the National Bank of Italy is watching their every move. Of course, more importantly, he must use this to reach a higher position. That's right, it means to reach a higher position. He has his own ambitions for the position of finance minister. As second only to the Chancellor of the Finance and several deputies, Mettiles is still very young. He is only in his 40s, and he has enough patience and perseverance to accomplish this goal. Look at how old our current finance minister, His Excellency Torsten Tegela, is. He is already 64 years old. As for the other deputies, they are all about the same age, and he is only 45 years old, so he can survive, even if he endures, of course. If it was useful to just endure, there wouldn't be so many people standing still in their positions. Mattels does not belong to this category. No matter where he goes, he is a capable person with outstanding abilities. When he was in the bank, he could ask the bank's board of directors to set up incentive shares specifically to retain him. Within the government, he has always been a reflection of his ability. Whenever there is a problem, the Minister of Finance, His Excellency Tegela, will be the first to recall him. His catchphrase was, "Wherever Mattels is, call him." This shows how capable Mattels is, as he is almost regarded as a firefighter. Of course, being remembered by the Chancellor of the Exchequer has both advantages and disadvantages, depending on how you look at it. But for Mattels, this is mostly a benefit. Tegela did not stop his progress just because he was easy to use. Instead, the newly formed central bank recommended him. After a conversation with the king, he was officially appointed as the inspector in charge of various financial institutions in Italy. Of course, becoming the governor of the National Bank of Italy is not that simple. It seems that it was just proposed by Finance Minister Tegela, and then the king met with him, and it was done. But in practice, Mattels paid a huge price just to defeat other competitors. The position of governor of the National Bank of Italy is being watched by hordes of people, and they do not want to take over this high power position. Then you need to compete. To know that you need to compete for qualifications, connections, abilities, etc. These all require competition. But Mattels' ability to stand out is enough to show that he is ahead of others in all aspects. Of course, taking this position does not mean that Mattels' position is stable. If he cannot achieve satisfactory results, he will need to talk about it. Mattels is not worried about this. Satisfactory results alone cannot reveal his ability. He needs dazzling results. Therefore, for this goal, Mattels has been patiently thinking and intends to act with more preparation. While Mattels was making preparations, a shocking news also appeared in front of Carlo. Although I was prepared in my heart, the news was still shocking enough. The German Emperor, Frederick III, who had only been on the throne for 3 months, died. This news is not shocking enough. Looking at the emergency telegram in his hand, Carlo knew that his third visit to Germany was about to begin. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story, and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 183, Visit to Germany, third time. William, please have your condolences. When standing in front of his friends again, Carlo showed a sad expression. Thank you very much for coming, Carlo. I'll take note of this. William, second, who still had a sad expression, patted Carlo on the shoulder to show respect when he spoke. Don't say that, William. I'm not only doing this for the sake of our personal feelings, but also for the sake of the relationship between the two countries. Carlo's frank and straightforward words made William II feel a little different from other people's qualities. Of course, he was not saying anything now, but what was revealed in his eyes said everything. And Carlo also knew that he couldn't always stay in front of William on such occasions, so he went on to greet other William's family members. For example, Queen Victoria, Prince Henrik, Princess Sophie, etc. When facing these people, Carlo was also meticulous and did his etiquette very well. When Carlo visited Germany this time, he brought fewer members. Only Foreign Minister Boccona was considered important, and the others were not very important. A heavy funeral was going on, but compared with the last grand funeral of William I, this time it was much different in terms of scale and guests. The reason is simple. The previous Emperor William I was highly respected and deeply loved by the German people. As for Emperor Frederick III, he has only been in office for 3 months and has basically never been seen. How many people can really like this emperor? Of course, Carlo didn't particularly care about this because he came with an important mission during his visit to Germany. Of course, in situations like Zhang Li's, he wouldn't say this. This would have to wait until the new emperor ascends the throne before he would contact William II to talk about it. Otherwise, wouldn't it be a waste of so many years of friendship? And while Carlo was busy greeting Emperor Frederick III's family, a pair of eyes from a distance stared at him for a long time. King Carlo is so diligent, he must have something on his mind. Prime Minister Bismarck said this, and beside him was Marshal Moltke, one of the three heroes who had resigned. The two stood aside and watched for a long time. No matter what he thinks, isn't it because you, the German helmsman, are here? Faced with Moltke's words, which he didn't know whether to consider as a compliment or as sarcasm, Bismarck did not answer. Instead, he asked, Malky, why do you think of leaving the general staff? That's right, Marshal Moltke has left the general staff, which was under his control. After he retired, he lived his own leisurely life like a wandering cloud and wild crane. Had it not been for the death of the emperor, he would not have come to Berlin Point. But this time it was not just because of this, but also because after a period of leisurely life, Moltke felt unaccustomed to it, and he planned to continue to contribute to the military. Of course, he will no longer hold the position of Chief of General Staff. He will focus more on military theory or other issues. Wardsi can manage the General Staff well. If that's the case, why should I continue to stay there? There was still one word left in Moltke's words, but Bismarck heard it. However, he didn't like Malky's style of running away first when he saw the opportunity was wrong. We can't let the results of Li's hard work be handed over to others like this. We need to at least keep a look at it. Faced with Bismarck's words, Moltke smiled and said, your idea is wrong. Everyone has his or her own idea, unless you plan to use military regulations to govern this country. But you have to know that this is simply impossible. It will trigger an internal war. I will never allow such a thing occur. Although the two of them spoke a little confused, they still knew what they meant. The Prime Minister was persuading Moltke to stay, but Moltke instead advised the Prime Minister to take advantage of this opportunity and retreat. The words of the two people who followed represented their own ideas. The results were naturally different and neither could convince the other. Then, what do you do next? Facing the Prime Minister's inquiry, Malky spread his hands and said, I plan to study some purely military theoretical issues, and I won't ask about anything else. Well, facing Moltke, who no longer had any ambition, Bismarck was not going to say anything more. After all, Moltke was older than him. Perhaps studying these things was also a kind of fun for him. But when it comes to this, Moltke is the oldest among the three heroes. He was born in 1800 and is already 88 years old. Marshal Earl Ron, one of the three heroes who has passed away, was also 3 years younger than Moltke. As for Bismarck, who is now in his 70s, he believes that he can still do his best for Germany. But this is what Bismarck himself thought. But some people don't think so. Carlo, you know, when I was a child, I admired my grandfather and the three heroes who made great contributions, especially the Prime Minister who used excellent diplomatic methods. But during the time when I worked with him, I felt terrible. The Prime Minister has changed from a hero to a stubborn old man, and I really don't know how to persuade him. The next day, William II found his good friend Carlo and talked endlessly about his troubles. There were only 2 people in the living room, and even the servants who served were kicked out. The captain of the guard even arranged for the attendants to prevent others from approaching and disturbing the conversation between the two. Why would William II say something dissatisfied with the Prime Minister to Carlo? First of all, Carlo is a friend, and he is also a friend of the king, which is enough weight. Secondly, telling Carlo this is the least threatening thing to him. That's right. Anyone who William II speaks to may cause harm, but it will be fine if he speaks to Carlo. The reason is simple. Carlo has no involvement in German political circles. In addition, Italy has requests from Germany and would not dare to let out William II's words unless Italy feels that it has too many friends. Not seeing the pained expression on Carlo's face, William II came early in the morning just to talk about this. It seemed that something must have made him very angry yesterday. Of course, facing the angry William II, Carlo could only persuade and persuade. William, actually I think the deterioration of the relationship between you and Prime Minister Bismarck is more a matter of communication and listening. The same thing, from you to the Prime Minister, the effect is completely different. Of course, you and Prime Minister Bismarck's political philosophy it may be different, and we need to be patient at this time. Although Carlo said that this also required patience, he knew that more than just patience could solve the problem between the two of them. Of course, he had no intention of acting as a peacemaker, but had his own purpose point. However, it is not convenient for him to say it at the moment. He needs to wait for contact with the iron-blooded Prime Minister before making a decision. Of course, he was still a good friend in front of William II. After the two of them finished chatting, they sent the satisfied William II away. Carlo then said, "Tell Boccona to contact the German government and ask them what their attitude is towards the request to amend the Treaty of Tang. Chapter 184 A Vision of Agreement, Part 1. The deaths of 2 consecutive emperors this year have made the Germans busy again. Bismarck, as the head of the government, is of course one of them. No. Just after the body of Frederick III was buried, he had to prepare for the coronation ceremony of Crown Prince William. Give this letter to the Minister of the Interior and tell him that enough military and police must be sent to ensure absolute safety on the day when the Crown Prince ascends the throne. In addition, the security of Berlin must be well managed. If Germany is embarrassed in front of dignitaries from various countries, that means hitting him with a stick." After asking his secretary to take the letter out, Bismarck rubbed his somewhat swollen temples. Although he has such great power and glory in his position, his resume is still thin. The opposition, which had been suppressed by his prestige and could only hide, was still watching his every move. These people were waiting for him to make a mistake so they could jump out and accuse him. Therefore, he was very careful about his work to avoid letting enemies catch him, but this also caused him to be unable to handle affairs quickly. He had dealt with a lot of things today, and excessive use of his brain made his head hurt, so he could only massage his temples to relieve the pain. After feeling a little better, Bismarck was ready to take down a document and read it. But at this time, a knock on the door disturbed him. "What's up?" Facing the sudden knock on the door, Bismarck put down the document in his hand and asked, "Prime Minister, it's me." The familiar voice at the door made Bismarck immediately recognize who it was. "Frederick, come in." As he opened his mouth, the door was pushed open and Foreign Minister Frederick walked in. "Frederick, what's the matter?" Bismarck had his own intention in asking this, because according to the arrangement, Frederick should be busy welcoming dignitaries and guests from various countries now, instead of suddenly running in front of him. But since he is here, it must mean there is something important, and this is what he is asking about. Facing Prime Minister Bismarck, Frederick certainly had important matters. "I saw him speak today. The Italian Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Boccona, came to me and proposed that he wants to amend the alliance treaty." Frederick's words made Bismarck look thoughtful. Modifying the alliance treaty was a big deal, both for Italy and Germany. What was the purpose of the Italians' sudden request? Bismarck, who was very diplomatic in his own right, had to consider what the motivation behind this was. Which treaty do the Italians propose to amend? Bismarck planned to ask which treaty Italy wanted to modify to determine Italy's intentions regarding the Prime Minister's inquiry. Frederick said a little embarrassedly, "I didn't ask about this, because Boccona just mentioned it at that time." Yes, Boccona said it casually to Frederick at the time, but in their position, they would think it was just an unintentional mistake by the other party. Facing Frederick's words, Bismarck smiled. "It seems that the Italians want to test whether we have any idea of amending the alliance treaty." Years of diplomatic experience led Bismarck to believe that Italy wanted to test Germany. Faced with the words of Bismarck, the invincible figure in European diplomacy for many years, how could Frederick not believe it? So he asked for advice. "Then how should we answer them?" "No need to answer. Wait until the Crown Prince ascends the throne. If we are too impatient, it will give those Italians some unrealistic fantasies, which will not be good." Now that the Prime Minister has made a decision, Frederick, as Foreign Secretary, knows what to do. That is to wait until Italy proposes it for the second time. This is what diplomacy is. It is a place for a battle of wits and courage, and as foreign minister, Frederick has enough patience. Next, the German side continued to prepare for the crown prince's coronation ceremony like a normal person. As for the Italian side, it seemed that they had forgotten this matter and did not mention it again. As a result, William II's coronation ceremony began within a few days. The scene this time was much grander than the coronation of his father, Frederick II. All countries sent envoys of sufficient size. Although the Queen of England did not come, the arrival of Crown Prince Edward also gave Germany enough face. Needless to say, in Russia, the shy Crown Prince Nicholas is here again. As for Austria-Hungary, Crown Prince Rudolf, who was deeply involved in romantic affairs and debts, has also come. Now, he has not yet met Baroness Mary Visser, who is willing to die with him. So no one would have thought that the heir to the Austro-Hungarian Empire would end his life in this way. Of course, in addition to these major countries, other countries also sent envoys one after another. Of course, they also tried their best to send crown princes or princes. As for the reason, this is obvious. Have you not seen that the representatives sent by several major countries are basically young people? Therefore, during this period, various princes could be seen everywhere in Berlin. There are 3 times more banquets, salons and other activities than before. But even among so many people, Carlo's identity is still the most prominent one in the first echelon. Because he is the King of Italy, Keru has much more power than other princes, crown princes or crown princes. Moreover, Italy is also a member of the Great Powers, and its status is enough for other small countries to look up to. To use a fashionable saying, no one who is more important than him has come, and no one who comes is as important as him. Even Crown Prince Edward of the British Empire is only a crown prince, not a king. Therefore, as one of the most prominent beings, Carlo received numerous invitations to banquets, dances, and salons during this period. Not to mention that Carlo is not married yet, and there are also many royal women who think they are qualified to compete for the position of queen. Facing the mountain of invitations, Carlo still chose a few appropriately to attend, and the ones he chose were basically more famous banquets. There was a joke in this. At a banquet, Carlo had a very speculative talk with the British Crown Prince Edward. Then the drunk Edward, for no reason, actually said that he wanted to give away his daughter Princess Louise. Married Carlo because he thought Carlo would make an excellent son-in-law. Although the attendants later stopped the crown prince's nonsense, Carlo got the title of the best son-in-law. This made Carlo really don't know what to say to Crown Prince Edward. The level of unreliability is somewhat reminiscent of a certain prince who served as the crown prince for 70 years in later generations, and Carlo also showed the style of the King of Italy in this communication. Although the Savoy family rarely integrates into the European royal circle, Carlo's performance gave him this opportunity. Of course, it is unclear whether this is his proof for the display of the Italian kingdom behind it. But no matter what, Carlo gained a few more royal friends. However, these days ended quickly because the day when William ascended the throne was approaching. As this day approaches, various social activities in Berlin also decrease rapidly. Chapter 185 Revision of Contract, Part 2. Needless to say, William II's enthronement ceremony was grand. Boys and girls formed various float formations and other various teams, which filled the entire parade with the atmosphere of the rising sun. As for the enthronement scene, there is nothing to say. Carlo and a group of princes and princesses stood aside and watched William's enthronement ceremony at close range. They first presented the crown, then the people paid tribute to him, and then his declaration of enthronement. Of course, in addition to these major steps, there are also some episodes, but there is no need to describe them one by one. On the contrary, the subsequent parade was much more beautiful than the enthronement ceremony. Of course, Carlo also accomplished a task during this process, which was to take the opportunity to tell Wilhelm II, who had just become the German emperor, that he wanted to talk to him about changes. The terms of the alliance between the two countries. Facing what Carlo said quietly, William II showed a slight surprise, but then he gave a no problem gesture. After completing his mission, Carlo could finally relax and watch the grand parade of the Germans. Sometimes I have to say that girls are a really good species. Girls from any country can be pleasing to the eye. Even German women who are tall and strong and have a strong style are still good looking in their teenage years. This grand parade lasted until the lanterns came on and the happy people left after that because the grand dinner began again. Everyone was a little hungry after waiting and watching for a day, and it was just time to replenish their energy. The dinner party was held in the palace not far away. The long table in the hall had been covered with a snow white tablecloth, and it was filled with a variety of food and drinks from all over the world. Every guest can choose freely. But no matter whether their stomachs were growling with hunger or not, everyone couldn't help but pick up a glass of champagne first, because the parliament would definitely use it. Sure enough, Prime Minister Bismarck and Wilhelm II appeared in front of everyone after a while. Let us drink to His Majesty the Emperor and wish Germany a better future. As the Prime Minister said the words of blessing, everyone raised their glasses. Even the representatives from various countries who were watching the ceremony also wanted to give the host the same courtesy. Didn't you see that the French representatives also raised their glasses in the same way? As for the true thoughts of the French people, this is unknown. After the on-site toasting ceremony ended, the banquet officially began. Of course, there are people taking food at the long table, but everyone is restrained. Carlo did not approach the long table. This was not because he was not hungry, but because he had eaten something secretly before. In addition, he was waiting for news from the Kaiser. Although he was not sure, Carlo believed that William II would definitely come to him. Sure enough, his prediction was very accurate. After waiting for about half an hour, an attendant came to him. His Majesty King Carlo, His Majesty the Emperor has something to ask you to come over. Facing the attendant's words, Carlo smiled. No problem, please lead the way. Led by his attendants, Carlo soon met Kaiser Wilhelm on the right side of the hall. Ha, look who's coming. William II saw Carlo and immediately came over. Congratulations, William. Facing the Kaiser who greeted him, Carlo of course smiled brightly. Why don't you come here, but you want me to come to you? There were too many people around you before, and I don't want to cause any trouble to you. The two people's questions and answers completely ignored the other people around them. Of course, these people are also very discerning. When they see the two monarchs wanting to talk, they naturally walk away. No one will stand like a log in front of the two monarchs at this time. William II whispered in a voice that only two people could hear. You said before that you wanted to amend the alliance treaty. What happened? Why are you telling me now? William II's words obviously contained a hint of questioning, because it was so sudden, and it came out directly without any news reaching his ears. Why don't you know? Facing Carlo's surprised expression, William II was a little confused. Should he know? The Minister of Foreign Affairs of our country has mentioned it to you before, and this is the one who informed Mr. Frederick. Carlo's words made William's expression change slightly, and then he recovered. When you said this, I remembered it. You did tell me before, but you know, I was too busy with the matter of ascending the throne, so I forgot about this. Of course, Carlo knew the explanation given by Wilhelm II was false, because he noticed that the Kaiser's polio-stricken hand slightly retracted into his sleeves. This was clear evidence that he was lying. Luo came to the conclusion after observing. But if that was the case, Carlo would not expose it, but would instead give him the steps. It doesn't matter, this kind of thing is understandable. After saying this, Carlo looked around and continued. Actually, this revision of the alliance treaty is mainly to make our alliance closer. You must know that the alliance treaty we signed is about to expire. Our country believes that continuing to sign the alliance treaty will be beneficial to both of us. Carlo's words are true, because Italy sincerely hopes to continue signing an alliance treaty with Germany, which can guarantee Italy's interests. Besides, Italy has paid more than it has gained in this alliance treaty. There is no reason not to continue signing such an advantageous alliance treaty. Of course, this is also a very beneficial alliance treaty for Germany, which can pose a threat to France from two sides. In addition, with the help of the two allies of Austria-Hungary and Italy, the German power can also penetrate into the Central Sea area. Among them, Italy plays a greater role. Although Germany does not have many interests in the Mediterranean, it is better than nothing, and the interests can be developed slowly. How can anyone have the luck to pick up a Lanfang colony. However, Carlo's words also explain why Italy proposed revising the alliance. William II responded directly after he finished speaking. I think the time is ripe to agree on the terms of a new alliance, and your country's ideas reflect our country's attitude. After receiving a clear answer from William II, Carlo knew that the matter was half done. Thank you for your answer. I believe that not only our friendship will last long, but the relationship between the two countries will also be like this. In fact, I have another idea. Oh, what's your idea? Faced with another idea coming from Carlo, William II was a little curious. That's right. I think your country's army is the best in the whole world, and our country's navy is also pretty good. So the communication between us, just relying on the exchanges between officers from both sides, feels too slow. I think it would be best if the armies of our two countries could be directly compared, so that people can see the differences. In fact, Carlo's method is to send a unit from each army to conduct joint training, which can magnify the shortcomings of both parties. Carlo's words caused William II to fall silent. Because there is no precedent for this situation, I have no research object. We can start on a small scale first. I think a battalion level scale will be enough, and we will take 1 year as a stage to see the effect. Of course, at the local level, we can choose between the two countries. Facing Carlo's increase, William II thought for a while and said, I'll talk to the military, and I believe they should bring good news. Of course, Carlo knew that William II was talking about the army, and as for his navy, he even agreed with both hands. You must know that the Italian navy is currently the envy of its German counterparts. Well, the purpose of Carlo's visit is to complete the 7th floor. Sorry everyone, Mantua is very busy recently, and with the census coming, Mantua is even busier. Please forgive me, everyone, and wait until the steamed bun explosion is over before I can give back to the book friends who support me. Chapter 186 Revision of Agreement, Part 2. Germany still attaches great importance to the treaty amendment proposed by Italy, especially after Carlo proposed it for the second time. The German government was ready for negotiations on the third day after William ascended the throne. The two parties officially entered negotiations. The negotiation location is now a conference room in the Prime Minister's office, and the two monarchs are nominally leading the negotiations. But the actual negotiations were left to others. The German side sent a negotiating delegation headed by Prime Minister Bismarck, while the Italian side sent a team headed by Foreign Minister Gemini Boccona. After everyone was seated, Bismarck, as the host, spoke first. The Three Kingdoms Alliance Treaty is indeed about to expire. I was a little busy before and almost forgot about it. But since your country brought it up, let's discuss the renewal of the contract today. Prime Minister Bismarck set the tone as soon as he opened his mouth. Facing the words of the German Prime Minister, Boccona, as the foreign minister, did not get too entangled in this. Even if the German side had the upper hand, Prime Minister Bismarck is right. What we are discussing this time is the future alliance between the two countries. At this point, Boccona went straight to the point. In the past 5 years, it has been proven that the alliance between us, Austria-Hungary, and the three countries has made a huge contribution to stabilizing the situation in Europe. In view of this, our country believes that we can deal with some issues that have not played a significant role. The treaty needs to be revised, and the outer circle of the treaty that is in line with the interests of our two countries can be appropriately deepened. After saying this, Boccona took a document from his assistant and handed it to Prime Minister Bismarck across the table. This is our country's draft of appropriate modifications to several articles in the treaty. If you are dissatisfied with anything, we can talk about it in person. After receiving the draft from the Italian side, Bismarck began to read it seriously. In this draft, the Italians also carefully used a top-bottom comparison mode to compare the modifications with the previous provisions. It was precisely by virtue of the upper and lower comparison mode that Bismarck quickly discovered the difference. Of course, some changes may only be minor changes, but among them, Bismarck found a very big change point. That is Article 4 of the treaty, and its original version is, when a major power not a signatory to this treaty threatens the national security of one of the contracting states, and that contracting state is forced to go to war with it, the other contracting states are obliged to remain neutral and reserved toward the allies the right to engage in war when appropriate. Now Italy has changed it to mean that when a major country that is not a signatory to this treaty threatens the national security of one of the contracting states and that contracting state goes to war with it, the other contracting states are obliged to provide assistance to the allies. This may not be limited to diplomatic and public opinion. Reserves the right to enter the fray when appropriate. The whole article is less coercive and neutral and has more help such as diplomatic public opinion, but the meaning immediately becomes completely different. This will also mean that no matter who among the three parties initiates the war, the other two countries will need to help each other in diplomacy and public opinion. As an old fox in politics, Bismarck immediately smelled something different from the revised treaty. You must be planning to start a war, right? The iron-blooded prime minister, who was like a human spirit, immediately pointed out the Italians' intentions. No, you wrongly blamed us. We are all equal regarding the amendment of this article. It is not what you think. Facing Bismarck's suggestion of Italy's intentions, Bicona, as foreign minister, immediately denied it. Everyone is playing diplomacy. As long as there is no evidence, no one will admit it. Even if there is evidence, you can still deny it from all aspects, such as the evidence is forged and other excuses. You can't be shameless when playing diplomacy. Although Bicona denied it, who was Bismarck? How could he believe it, just because of the other party's denial? Now he can be sure that the Italians are preparing for war, but it is still unknown who the target is. But there are not many worthy of Italy's action, and I believe they will always be exposed. If this is the case, then our country believes that it is best to change the treaty back to the original one, because this is the best choice for both our countries. Bismarck's words immediately made the Italian delegation speechless, because they did not expect that the prime minister was completely unwilling to accept the Italian draft, and did not even give him a chance to negotiate. At this time, Carlo, who was observing the negotiation, couldn't sit still. He stood up and said, "If there are any differences, we can skip them first. We can start talking about terms that both parties are willing to accept." Carlo's sudden intervention made the Italian delegation breathe a sigh of relief. They were stunned by the German prime minister for a moment, so they were stunned. With Carlo's reminder, they realized that they could start from simple "let's start with it." After Prime Minister Bismarck heard Carlo's words, he frowned and then relaxed. The subsequent negotiations proceeded very quickly. There were too many terms that the two parties were willing to accept. It can be said that except for the fourth article changed by Italy, everything else was easy to negotiate. Of course, no matter how easy it is to talk about, this still needs to be discussed one by one. After a day's negotiation, taking a break for lunch to replenish energy, other terms have basically been negotiated, and only the people below need to discuss the details to complete it. When the negotiations were about to reach Italy's revised Article 4, Carlo stood up again. "I think this alliance treaty is not good enough." Facing Carlo, who stood up to speak again, Bismarck didn't know what mood he was in. He said to the young Italian monarch, "Since King Carlo has a new idea, why not sit down and talk about it?" Obviously, Bismarck was expressing his dissatisfaction with Carlo's intervention in the negotiations, but there is a saying that goes well, "Follow the stick when you hit the snake." Carlo said without hesitation, "Since Prime Minister Bismarck has invited me, it would be a good time to sit down and talk." After speaking, he ignored the expression of the iron-blooded prime minister and sat directly opposite him. Bicona, who was originally sitting in this position, could only squeeze his assistant away. Completely ignoring the expressions of the German delegation and the somewhat surprised look in William II's eyes, Carlo directly expressed his thoughts. "Actually, each of our three countries has its own advantages. Our country's warship design and manufacturing are very good, but your country and Austria-Hungary are weaker in this aspect. My idea is that we in Italy can use our own advantages in warship design and manufacturing experience to help your country and Austria-Hungary improve their strength in this area." Carlo's words made Bismarck look even more unhappy, but besides him, several people in the German delegation showed joy on their faces. especially Kaiser Wilhelm, who was sitting next to him and looked surprised just now, was even more delighted. Our country's demand for warship technology is not urgent. If your country really wants to exchange technology, then use your country's technology in electricity. Prime Minister Bismarck did not take this trick. Instead, he asked for Italian power technology. Regarding Bismarck's request, the Italian delegation's expressions became very exciting, because this is the only civilian technology that Italy can produce. This old boy has really poisonous eyes, and he took a fancy to Italy's most important technology at a glance. There is no problem with this. As long as your country likes it, our country can provide a full set of technology and production indicators. There is one more chapter coming soon. Chapter 187, Revision of Agreement. End. Unexpectedly, facing Bismarck's line, Carlo didn't hesitate at all and agreed immediately. But if you want to eat Carlo's food, you can't do it without paying the price. Carlo then reported several technologies that needed to be exchanged, which made Bismarck speechless. We only need to participate in your country's tungsten alloy tool experiments and be able to share technology. In addition, our country can join in Krupp's armor steel research and development and your country's die technology. Our country can hand over the alternating current technology. The technologies Carlo spoke about are all technologies that Germany is proud of. The tungsten alloy cutting tools under development are the incubators of German precision machines, and Krupp's steel technology is also very good. As for die technology, this is Germany's flagship product exported, and its derived chemical technology has kept Germany at the forefront of the chemical industry. Bismarck's face became ugly as he listened to the techniques Carlo mentioned. It is obvious that Bismarck cannot come up with these technologies, which are related to the jobs of millions of German people in these industries. I'm sorry, we can't provide these technologies because they are the wealth of private companies, and we can't do anything to take away other people's wealth. Facing the iron-blooded Prime Minister's words, Carlo smiled slightly. Our country's alternating current technology is also the wealth of Westinghouse Electric Company, and our country cannot do anything to seize other people's wealth. So I think it is better to start cooperation with military technology first. Now, Prime Minister Bismarck could no longer talk about alternating current technology, but could only turn back to the military technology Carlo talked about. To be fair, Italy currently does not have much military technology at its disposal, and its warship technology is already considered its fist point. Of course, it should also be noted that, except for Prime Minister Bismarck and a few others, the other German representatives showed expressions of interest. This can also be said that the current desire for the sea in Germany has begun to arise. Even if Bismarck continued to be prime minister, he could not suppress the pursuit of overseas interests by all classes in the country. In particular, the growing bourgeoisie has an abnormal desire for the market. At this time, Germany was a bit like the Chinese dynasty of later generations, but in this era, tariffs in various countries were relatively high, leaving a lack of a sufficient market for German products. If Germany alone owns the engine-hawking markets, then it is not urgent at all, but it is not impossible. Then this requires the German government to find a market for it, and Bismarck, a politician who focuses on the local area and does not pay attention to overseas development, is destined not to be accommodated by the bourgeoisie. This is why William II can arouse cheers from the people, as long as he holds high the banner of overseas expansion. For example, Germany also needs land under the sun. If it is clear that it needs new markets, why shouldn't the bourgeoisie cheer? We can use artillery, rifles and other army weapons and equipment as well as communication and command technology in exchange. When he said this, Bismarck had not yet reacted. Carlo didn't give him a chance to react and immediately answered, "Okay, let's do it like this." At this time, the deputy poked the prime minister with his finger and said softly, "Last time, the Italians came to purchase a batch of army equipment and technology. At present Krupp's artillery technology is only the most advanced batch." Confronted by his deputy's words, Bismarck knew he had been teased by the young Italian king. But it doesn't matter. There is still a long way to go. He wants to see how the Italians amend Article 4. It's getting late, so let's continue talking tomorrow. Unexpectedly, Carlo took out the avoidance card of fighting another day and stopped taking the move point. This made Bismarck, who had been brewing some rhetoric, have no choice but to hold back his words. Okay, let's continue talking tomorrow. We hope King Carlo will continue to appear at the negotiating table. After secretly mocking the other party, Bismarck took the German delegation and left. As for Kaiser Wilhelm, after quietly giving Carlo a thumbs up, he also left. When the Italian delegation was left in the conference room, Carlo spoke to them. Okay, everyone is tired today, let's go back. Carlo and his party immediately walked out of the Prime Minister's office. In the Prime Minister's office, as Prime Minister Bismarck, he had calmed down at this time. Although he was slightly at a disadvantage in the confrontation with the young boy Carlo, he never expected that the young Italian king would end up in person without regard for his face, and was caught off guard. But it doesn't matter, he has been hit by strong winds and waves, and he can still be hit by Italy's small tricks. It was not considered before, but now that it is considered, the subsequent negotiations will be different. And he also saw that the Italians would definitely make changes to Article 4, but it would not be easy to do so. Because he has only one purpose in wooing Italy, that is, he needs Italians to keep an eye on southern France, and must get rid of Italy's unrealistic illusions, so he will not let go of the upcoming negotiations. I hope the Italians won't cry too ugly when the time comes. Prime Minister Bismarck was already high-spirited when thinking about tomorrow's negotiations. As for Carlo, they were still riding a carriage on their way back to the cave. Looking out the window at the charming scenery of Berlin, Carlo suddenly said, "Next we need to change our strategy and activate our backup plan." Thinking of today's war of words with Prime Minister Bismarck, Bacona felt ashamed of his performance because a few highlights of this negotiation were basically reached by the king. Okay, then, I will go to the embassy in person to send a coded message and immediately activate the backup plan. Be careful, don't let anyone know about this plan. Yes, Your Majesty. After the two had a brief conversation, Bacona immediately changed to another very ordinary carriage. When passing by a street intersection, he took the opportunity to blend into the army of carriages on the street. As for Carlo, he led the delegation all the way back to the cave. A new day, a new beginning. So a new round of negotiations began again. Bacona was still sitting opposite Bismarck, but this time members of the two delegations frequently looked at Carlo, who was sitting beside him. Such frequent gazes made even Kaiser Wilhelm next to him feel a little uncomfortable. Faced with such attention, Carlo was as steady as a mountain with roots under his feet. Next, let's get on with the negotiations. After speaking first, Bismarck continued. As for the draft you proposed, we think it is very inappropriate and goes against the consensus between the two parties a few years ago. Therefore, our country is not willing to see the terms develop in an uncontrollable direction. Prime Minister Bismarck, this is not uncontrollable. This is just a way that our country hopes to strengthen the relationship between the two countries. Facing Bismarck's words, as the Italian negotiator, Bacona certainly needed to fight hard. However, his words did not impress Prime Minister Bismarck, who shook his head one after another. Then Prime Minister Bismarck asked several questions one after another, and Bacona answered them one by one. Although it seems that the two sides are having a question and answer session, everyone can see that the Italian side has always been at a disadvantage and has no power to fight back after being suppressed by the German side. But no matter how disadvantaged the Italian negotiating delegation was this time, Carlo remained motionless. Such a move made Bismarck couldn't help but cast a doubtful look. But since Carlo does not leave, everyone can see that there is not much that Italy can hold on to in this negotiation. In the end, the negotiation result still adopted the original Article 4, when a major power, that is not a signatory to this treaty, threatens the national security of one of the contracting states and that contracting state is forced to go to war with it. The other contracting states are obliged to remain neutral towards the allies, while reserves the right to enter the fray when appropriate. Faced with such a result, the Italian side had no choice but to accept it. It's just that the victorious Prime Minister Bismarck didn't notice. When Carlo saw this situation, He slightly raised the corner of his mouth point. It doesn't matter. We have another one. Next point. The October update has been completed. Steamed bun has written 138,000 words. Anyone who knows Steamed bun's habits will understand that Steamed bun has worked very hard. Next, let's achieve even better results in November. I beg you veterans to subscribe more. It can increase the motivation of Steamed bun coding. Chapter 188 Combination Boxing, Part 1. Although Italy and Germany are much closer to negotiating, the alliance treaty still cannot be signed because it still lacks another country, the Austro-Hungarian Empire. So soon the two parties move to Vienna, preparing to discuss the renewal of the contract with Austria-Hungary. Facing the two teams of negotiators coming from Berlin, Austria-Hungary also attached great importance to it. Because the Triple Alliance Treaty is an upgraded version of the German-Austrian Alliance Treaty. It is also very beneficial to the Austro-Hungarian Empire. However, the contract renewal, which was originally thought to be just a formality, has caused trouble. Prime Minister Bismarck, we have seen the terms in this treaty, and our country believes that changes should be made that are more in line with the interests of the three countries. As soon as the three parties sat down, Count Gustav Karnacki, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister and chairman of the Council of Ministers, spoke out about Austria-Hungary's different opinions. One more thing, the Austro-Hungarian foreign minister has been concurrently serving as the chairman of the Council of Ministers for the past 2 decades, because the Austro-Hungarian Empire does not have the position of Prime Minister, only the Prime Minister of Austria and the Prime Minister of Hungary. Traditionally, the Austro-Hungarian Prime Minister is basically the chairman of the Council of Ministers, and this is concurrently held by the chairman of the Council of Ministers. It should be a translation problem. I think it's the chairman of the Council of Ministers, but Mantel can't read German, and doesn't dare to change it randomly. Count Karnacki's words made the German side feel a thump in their hearts, and there was a feeling that things were about to get out of control. Sure enough, following Prime Minister Bismarck's words, what Austria-Hungary thought should be changed, the Count of Karnacki immediately expressed Austria-Hungary's opinion. Our country believes that Article 4 of the treaty is somewhat out of date. For example, when a major power, that is not a signatory to this treaty, threatens the national security of one of the contracting states and that contracting state is forced to engage in war with it, the other contracting states are obliged to maintain neutral. We reserve the right to participate in war when appropriate. We think this needs to be changed. As soon as Count Karnacki finished speaking, the German representative's face immediately became brighter. Although Prime Minister Bismarck had already made some speculations, he, who was well educated, still endured the unhappiness in his heart and spoke. So how should we change it? We believe that it should be changed to the obligation of other contracting states to maintain assistance to allies. What Count Karnacki said next had similar meanings to Italy's previous opinions, both of which required public opinion and diplomatic support from allies. Faced with Count Karnacki's words, Bismarck did not need to say it, but he could personally see that Italy and Austria had reached a consensus in this regard. Now Bismarck understood everything. No wonder Italy no longer persisted. They were waiting to attack together after the round with Austria-Hungary. Faced with this situation, even Bismarck, who was outstanding in diplomacy, found it difficult. Because Austria-Hungary is different from Italy. If we use simpler words to describe the relationship between Germany and the two countries, then Italy is a friend. Although everyone is pretty good on weekdays, when it comes to critical situations, they will break up as soon as possible, and Germany will not regret it. As for Austria-Hungary, they have a brotherly relationship. Although there are some minor frictions on weekdays, in critical situations, Germany will not give up on Austria-Hungary. Of course, this may not be accurate, but it is generally like this. Otherwise, it would not be possible. Just a few years after fighting the Austro-Prussian War, they would become allies again. Of course, in addition to the historical relationship of the same species and ethnicity, there is also the factor of France. As long as France still poses a threat to Germany, its diplomatic strategy will not change. So after Karnacki finished speaking, Bismarck thought for a while before speaking. We will consider your suggestion carefully. However, I feel a little unwell due to the long journey. I hope the meeting can be postponed to tomorrow. Yes, Bismarck also used the pause card. At present, Germany lacks intelligence support, so it is not known why Austria-Hungary also supports Italy's draft. It is a taboo in diplomacy to continue talking without knowing what the opponent's cards are. Faced with Bismarck's health reasons for suspending negotiations, how could the Austro-Hungarian side represented by Carnacki not accept it? In that case, then Count Bismarck should rest a little longer, and we can wait. With Carnacki's words, the three-party negotiations were pressed on the pause button. Bismarck, who hurried out of the negotiation venue, whispered instructions to the deputy foreign minister beside him. Wiesike, it's not convenient for me to show up next time. Please contact your friends in Austria-Hungary and find out what's going on. Wiesike, who knew the seriousness of the matter, nodded without saying anything to show that he understood. Compared with the German representatives who left in a hurry, the Austro-Hungarian and Italian representatives walked behind slowly. Your Excellency Boccona, are you interested in having a drink with us, Count? Carnacki extended an invitation to Boccona beside him. I heard that your wine is very famous throughout Vienna. I'm very honored to have requested it. The performance of the Italian and Austrian negotiating leaders will definitely shock the jaws of uninformed people. When did the relationship between the two countries become so good? In fact, this is not surprising at all, because the two completely explained what it means that there are no eternal friends, only eternal interests. The two countries are getting closer so quickly precisely because of their interests. Italy's proposal to amend Article 4 was simply an unexpected surprise for Austria-Hungary. You can see it just by opening the map. Look at the countries surrounding Austria-Hungary. Germany and Italy are now allies, so there is no need to worry at all. To the east is Russia, its rival in the Balkan competition. As long as it can resist the threat of Russia, the Balkan countries will be completely unable to withstand the various methods of Austria-Hungary. Although there are still some small countries around Germany, countries such as the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark are deeply involved with other European powers. Unless Germany intends to challenge 2 or 3 opponents, it cannot move at all. This is also the reason why Bismarck was unwilling to amend Article 4. Germany's benefits from the revised Article 4 were too low, and it was completely making a wedding dress for the other two countries. As for Italy, its land has no possibility of expansion. Its land territory is restricted by France and Austria. As for the poor Switzerland, its location makes Italy dare not touch it at all. Although there is no possibility of expansion on Italian land, Italy has an excellent navy. With its powerful navy, it can invade and occupy countries along the Mediterranean Sea. Of course, this also requires choosing an opponent, and the opponent chosen by Italy this time will at least not allow other powers to interfere. Of course, in addition to this reason, Italy also made another huge commitment to Austria-Hungary. It is this commitment that is the main reason why the people of Austria-Hungary have to stand firm regardless of their relationship with Germany. So what is the promise that has such power? Chapter 189 Combination Boxing, Part 2. In the German embassy late at night, Prime Minister Bismarck still had not rested, because Wiesike had brought back news. You said that the Italians promised the Austrians to support their annexation of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Yes, Prime Minister, this is what our country heard from our Austrian friends. 5 days ago, the Italian ambassador paid a visit to Joseph I, and then the Austro-Hungarian emperor summoned his ministers and declared that Italy supports Austria-Hungary's war on Bosnia and Herzegovina. Direct annexation. With the exception of Hungarian Prime Minister Tisza Kalman, everyone else supports Austria-Hungary converting Bosnia and Herzegovina from trusteeship to direct administration at an appropriate time in the future. The news Wiesike brought was so shocking that, even after he finished speaking, Prime Minister Bismarck was still mumbling the words. It turns out it's Bosnia and Herzegovina. No wonder the Austrians are so interested. The full name of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which attracted the attention of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, was Bosnia and Herzegovina. This region was a diplomatic achievement obtained by the Austro-Hungarian Empire at the Berlin Congress in 1878. Since various countries were dissatisfied with Russia's results in the 10th Russo-Turkish War, a meeting was held in Berlin to negotiate among all parties. The main purpose of the meeting was to modify the terms of the Treaty of San Stefano. This was the defeat clause signed by the Ottomans, so that Turkey could retain Constantinople. This move prevents Russia from expanding into the Balkans and rushing out of the Black Sea after defeating Turkey. As compensation for Austria-Hungary's great efforts, and perhaps with some other intentions, the countries at the meeting handed over Bosnia and Herzegovina to its custody. During the time when Bosnia and Herzegovina was in charge, Austria-Hungary had always wanted to turn it into its own territory, because this would allow Austria-Hungary to significantly increase its power in the Balkans, and at the same time, seize the opportunity. Of course, the Italians are not fuel efficient, so how could Austria and Hungary get such a big advantage for nothing? For this reason, Austria-Hungary also gave Italy a promise, that is, when Italy and the Ottomans go to war, Austria-Hungary must unswervingly support itself. It is really amazing that two original enemies have become friendly due to the trend of common interests. However, this was a bit troublesome for Bismarck, because it was completely a combination of interests, and to break up their alliance, Germany needed to show greater interests. Is this true? Yes, but Bismarck did not intend to do so, because it would not be worth the gain. A qualified politician can weigh the pros and cons, and cannot let emotions control his mind. How could Bismarck, as a top politician, not be clear about this? He was careless before, and didn't expect that the Italians would dare to play this trick. Bismarck, who had returned to his normal state, then said to Wiesecker, "Thank you for your hard work, I was careless this time." Upon hearing the Prime Minister's words, Wiesecker, as foreign minister, immediately realized that the Prime Minister was already aware of his own problems in the face of two allies joining forces. "It doesn't matter. We didn't think carefully this time. It won't be so easy next time." The German delegation is reviewing its mistakes, and in the Italian embassy, the Italian representative, His Excellency Boccona, is also sending a telegram back to the country regarding today's negotiations. Although the wine from Count Carnocchi's family was extremely charming, he would not forget the king's request. Yes, Carlo, as king, has returned to his country, but because he attaches great importance to negotiations, he requires the foreign secretary to inform him of the developments on the German side in a timely manner. After a while, the embassy telegraph operator took off his earphones and informed him that the telegram had been sent back to the country. With a satisfied smile, Boccona returned to his residence. On a new day, His Excellency Bismarck, who was feeling unwell, finally recovered, so the negotiations continued. This time the negotiations were different from yesterday. The German representatives were extremely active. "This is not possible at all. If it is according to your requirements, then how can our German interests be preserved? Hostile countries must be declared war before both parties declare war. Before that, we will never recognize the labeling of countries that have not declared war as hostile countries, even if it means issuing an ultimatum. You label a country with a population of more than 2 million as a big country. Isn't this too childish? Such a country can only be considered a small country at best, and the whole of Europe is a big country. It is completely unreasonable." Well, the high-spirited German representatives and the Italian and Austrian negotiators were engaged in a fierce war of words. The main negotiators of the three parties sat aside and watched the people below making as much noise as a vegetable market. They all said nothing, just sat here and watched. This is unreasonable, very unreasonable. In fact, Italy and Austria have already guessed something, otherwise they would not have been working here with Prime Minister Bismarck. But perhaps because of his age, Bismarck was not as able to sit as the other two. He stood up, patted his butt, and said to the two of them, "I'm tired of sitting, why don't I go out and take a few steps?" Bismarck's words immediately cheered up the two of them, and they both realized that they were about to enter a critical moment. Very willing to. It's an honor. So, after leaving a group of people behind, only 3 people came over alone. Many people saw the scene of the 3 leaving, but this did not affect their continued argument. As the door to the room closed, the quarrel in the conference room finally subsided. The 3 of them walked along the aisle to the rooftop. Looking at the scenery in the distance, Bismarck said to the 2 people following him, "I can agree to your request, and I can even adopt a tacit attitude toward your carving up of Ottoman territory." Bismarck broke the news as soon as he came up, but both Carnegie and Bacona realized that the iron-blooded prime minister had more to say, and they listened silently to his continued speech. Sure enough, Bismarck then spoke. This is the first time and the last time. If something like this happens next time, then I need to consider whether an alliance is in Germany's interest. This is not only what I mean, but also what the German people think. We need to be able to allies who help, not drag us down. Bismarck's words frightened the two of them, and quickly stated that there would be no next time. There is no way. Compared with Germany, the two countries need Germany's power. Especially when Bismarck said that he would consider whether it was appropriate to form an alliance. No one dared to offend the fat old man. Fist is more powerful than strategy. No matter how many strategies you use, you will not dare to explode in the face of absolute strength. After letting the two men know the consequences of angering Germany, Bismarck certainly did not intend to let them go. Count Carnegie, our country hopes that your country can negotiate with the Ottomans and provide a certain amount of compensation before annexing Bosnia and Herzegovina. Carnegie, who knew that Germany also had many interests in the Ottomans, said immediately, "No problem, we will negotiate with Osman." After solving the Austro-Hungarian problem, Bismarck looked at Bacona and said, "You, Italy, are causing trouble for me. If you want our country to promise that you will not interfere, then we will set aside 2 military ports from Djibouti in East Africa and Pontianak in Lanfang, and our country will lease them for 20 years at a price of 100,000 marks per year." When faced with Bismarck's offer to rent a military port, Bacona was about to say that he couldn't decide when he saw the iron-blooded prime minister looking at him and saying, "Don't refuse. I'll give you 1 day. Before this time tomorrow, my words will still be valid." It was obvious that the iron-blooded prime minister did not intend to give him a chance to bargain. Faced with such a situation, what else could he say? He could only return to the embassy and send an urgent telegram later. After convincing the two of them, he raised his index finger and continued. In addition, regarding what kind of negotiation on Article 4 can be achieved, let the people below continue to talk, and we should not interfere. Since Bismarck had agreed to them in principle, the two people who didn't want to cause more trouble also nodded. "I think it works. I have no opinion." If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 190, Revealing Ambition, Part 1. Bismarck agreed to the demands of the two countries and the results of this negotiation were basically implemented. However, the final signing by the three parties was still delayed until 10 days because disputes over many details prolonged the negotiation time point. But no matter what, when this new alliance treaty appeared in front of Carlo, he was sincerely relieved. This negotiation was so difficult that it almost angered Germany, even if it costs Italy 2 colonial naval bases. Of course, this effort is worth it. At least it allows Italy to gain support from its allies. Thank you for your hard work, Lord Bacona. After signing his name on the treaty, Carlo thanked Bacona who stood in front of him. "Your Majesty, I'm so ashamed of myself." Bacona, who knew his own affairs well, felt that he had made little contribution to this negotiation and could not bear the praise from the king. "It's okay. As long as we achieve our goal, Bacona, there is no need to worry about it." Carlo, who knew what his foreign minister was thinking, casually tried to persuade him. "Besides, Bismarck is very familiar with you. Sometimes, if something unexpected happens suddenly, we might be able to achieve our goal. Isn't that how we achieved it?" Well, Carlo's persuasion is still very effective, and the foreign secretary is no longer obsessed with this matter. After the two exchanged a few words, Bacona left with the document signed by Carlo. After the foreign minister left, the captain of the guard came in holding a large document. "Your Majesty, this is the information you asked the intelligence department to collect. Put it here first." Facing Carlo's instructions, Felicie placed all the information on Carlo's desk. The towering information completely covered Carlo's entire body. "Your Majesty, this is all information collected by the intelligence department in the past 10 years. In addition to military information such as garrisons, transportation, military depots, and supply points, there is also social information such as the population, products, and ethnic conflicts in each region. In addition, the climate, hydrology and other information also occupy a part. After listening to Felicimaki's words, Carlo picked up an intelligence document and read it. Just a few words on the cover, a summary of intelligence on Albania. Pick up a copy again, which is a summary of Crete intelligence. Next, the intelligence collection on Macedonia, Thrace, and Libya appeared in Carlo's eyes. Seeing the king picking up intelligence materials, and looking at the covers one after another, Felicimaki, the captain of the bodyguard, spoke. Your Majesty, this is compiled specially by the intelligence department. The main reason is that the original data is too complicated and affects reading. Fair images. Explanation made Carlo smile. I'm determined. After feeling that it was about the same, the captain of the guard quietly withdrew, leaving Carlo alone to flip through the information in his hand. This situation lasted until the lights came on, and Carlo, who felt his eyes were dull after watching for a long time, stood up from his chair. It was okay not to stand up, but as soon as he stood up he felt dizzy. Oops, I'm a little tired, but there is a saying, the ignorant is fearless. Although Carlo set his next target on the Ottoman Empire, after carefully studying the situation, he found that the Ottoman Empire was not weak point. Although it was beaten one after another by the Russians, it also brought an army with rich combat experience to the Ottoman Empire. Its equipment closely followed Europe. Its troops stationed in Europe were generally equipped with breech-loading guns. However, the Ottomans relied more on its huge army, with a standing army of 400,000 to 500,000, making it the key to suppressing local separatism. Of course, the numerous ethnic groups, backward political system, and backward military organization of the Ottomans were also the main reasons that restricted the combat effectiveness of their army. For Italy, it is still somewhat difficult to completely defeat the Ottomans militarily. The main reason was that Italy's economy could not prolong the war for too long, and the combat effectiveness of the Italian army made it difficult for Carlo to feel relieved. But looking around Italy, Carlo really couldn't think of anyone to attack except Osman. Don't worry about other European countries. Spain is completely unable to move. Greece also has the United Kingdom behind it. As for the two neighbors, it would be better if they don't fight. It seems that apart from Osman, there is no choice. But this is the first step in the rise of Italy. Carlo will win it no matter what, even if it drags down the economy. I didn't realize that I had to pay such a high price, and it would be unjustifiable if I didn't get started. However, if he wanted to fight the Ottomans, Carlo still needed to prepare in advance, and he had already thought of a way for this. The weather over the weekend was great. The sun was shining brightly, and the sky was clear, making it a good time to travel. But today's palace is a little different, because there are several carriages parked at the entrance of the palace. The guards, who were familiar with these carriages, were all whispering about what kind of meeting the king was convening. He actually called the Prime Minister, Foreign Minister, Finance Minister, and Navy and Army Ministers together, but as the guards guarding the gate, they have no right to know this. In fact, except for the captain of the guard who knew something, no one else knew. In the conference hall, the important ministers were chatting among themselves before waiting for the king's arrival. However, their chat was still very clear. The ministers on the government side were just chatting among themselves and did not care about the military side at all. These civil servants are really hateful. As the Minister of War, Admiral Surrogate, it was natural for him to go to Admiral Garlick, the Minister of Navy, to complain. What's the matter, Surrogate? Faced with the sudden words from the Minister of War, General Garlick asked, what else could it be? Didn't our army hold a drill last month? At that time, some local residents' crops were crushed, and these civil servants refused to let go. Didn't we lose money? What else do they want from us, Admiral? Gorek also knew what Admiral Surrogate said, but it was not as simple as crushing some crops. At that time, a unit during the exercise misread the map and built fortifications on cultivated land. Continuous trampling and storage of various military supplies destroyed the place. The head of the household came forward to argue, but was beaten up. This incident happened to be seen by a reporter who came to interview, so the army was left in a state of disgrace and embarrassment. For this reason, Admiral Garlick was still in his office and laughed at the other party for a long time. However, the Minister of War is currently present, and General Gorak will certainly not expose the other party. Yes, these civil servants have indeed written it. They should not hold on to it. Faced with the words of the Navy Minister, when Admiral Serajat was about to say something, the door was suddenly opened. Immediately afterwards, a notification came. His Majesty, King Carlo, is here. Chapter 191 Revealing Ambition, Part 2. As the announcement came, everyone present immediately lined up in a neat queue to welcome Carlo's arrival. After greeting the important ministers present one by one, Carlo took his seat, which also meant that the meeting officially began. I think everyone should have some guesses about today's meeting, but before that, I need to announce a discipline. Today's meeting is top secret. No notes can be taken, or any paper can be taken away. In addition, the meeting minutes will also be recorded by the captain of the guard. Come and do it. As Carlo announced the first order, everyone present became serious, because the king's words have already stated the importance of the following meeting point. After seeing that everyone present was listening carefully, Carlo continued. First of all, I want to say that the alliance treaty between our country and Germany and Austria has been renewed. Next, I will let the Minister of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Bacona, talk about the specific situation faced. With Carlo's roll call, Bacona, as foreign minister, stood up and spoke. Everyone, after friendly negotiations between our country and Germany and Austria, the renewal of the alliance treaty has been completed. After being signed by the monarchs of the three countries, the treaty has officially entered into force. Next, let me tell you what the differences are in the treaty. During Bacona's explanation, those present learned that Article 4 of the alliance terms had been modified to allow the contracting countries to have greater initiative. In addition, Bacona also talked about the mutual commitment between Italy and Austria-Hungary. However, when talking about this, everyone now had different expressions. The Prime Minister and the Minister of Finance frowned, while the Minister of Navy and Army showed his face smile. Because they all saw Italy's opportunity. After Bacona finished speaking, Carlo continued. Thank you very much, Mr. Bacona, for your explanation. Now everyone knows what we need to do next. Facing Carlo's question, Desperatus, as Prime Minister, raised his hand to indicate that he had a question. Carlo asked, after seeing the Prime Minister's actions. Prime Minister, what do you want to say, Your Majesty? I would like to ask, are you preparing for war with the Ottoman Empire? Yes. Faced with the Prime Minister's inquiry, Carlo answered without hesitation. As a result, the Prime Minister heard Carlo's answer and immediately spoke seriously. Your Majesty, please make a careful decision. You must know that our country's economic development is pretty good. If there is a war with the Ottomans, it is easy to win. If we lose, or there is a stalemate, our previous efforts will be in vain. Especially our country when there is still so much debt. It needs to be carefully considered. After listening to the Prime Minister's words, Carlo asked, Prime Minister, do you think I haven't thought about it carefully? I don't mean this, but I think that for such a major decision related to Italy's future, it is best to listen to other opinions. Faced with the Prime Minister's explanation, Carlo stood up. Prime Minister, you see that the economy is developing well, and you don't want a war to break this situation. But have you ever thought about it? In fact, I don't want to either. However, Italy's crowded land has too many people, and economic development alone cannot satisfy them. Demand. In addition, I think you have also seen that the mineral resources currently needed for the development of industry in our country basically come from imports. Can this situation allow the economy to continue to develop? Carlo stared at the Prime Minister and saw that he seemed to have something to say, so he continued talking. Although the development of our country's use of electricity has made the economy look good, we must remember that our country lacks various minerals, which is restricting our development. and the current colonies in East Africa and Southeast Asia are also due to cost, and the restrictions of the Suez Canal prevent the country from using these two colonies. Therefore, the only one that can help our country recover from this situation is the Ottoman Empire. Faced with Carlo's words one after another, the Prime Minister wanted to resist. This was not because he thought what King Carlo said was wrong. How could he, as Prime Minister, not know about the problems that Camp Ali had? But he was very dissatisfied that he, the Prime Minister, was not informed of Osman's intention to launch a war in advance. Your Majesty, even if what you said is very accurate, for such a big event, it is best to inform our government in advance. Anyone could hear the Prime Minister's dissatisfaction, so the scene immediately fell into a strange and quiet atmosphere. I'm sorry for not notifying the government in advance. The main reason is that the time was not ripe. After renewing the Three Kingdoms alliance, didn't I call everyone together? The words from Carlo's mouth were a bit surprising. I didn't expect that the king could actually give in to the Prime Minister. You must know that Carlo has always had a very tough image, and he feels the same, no matter who he is towards. But they soon realized that this was just an illusion, and Carlo continued. The next step is to prepare for war against the Ottomans. I don't think anyone has any objections to this, right? As soon as he finished speaking, Carlo stared at the people in the venue, especially the Prime Minister. The Prime Minister and the King looked at each other, and their performances made the atmosphere tense again. I favor preparations for war with the Ottoman Empire. Suddenly, a voice broke the situation. The person who spoke was somewhat surprising, because it was Foreign Minister Jiminy Bacona. As Bacona opened his mouth, the Minister of Navy and Army, who had long been interested, was not willing to lag behind. Our Navy is in favor of preparing for war against the Ottomans. As long as the king orders it, the navy is more than capable of leaving the Ottomans without sea routes at any time. Admiral Gorek, who had already received many benefits, was the first to speak, and his words made several people say in their hearts, flattery. But he was right. Italy's biggest advantage over the Ottoman Empire was its navy. As long as the Italian navy sent half of its warships, all the old warships of the Ottoman navy would hide in the Black Sea Strait. Because it's a free delivery. When it comes out, it's a complete package. We in the army also favor preparations for war against the Ottoman Empire. Compared with the navy, the Minister of War is not so confident. In the final analysis, it was due to strength. The Ottoman army was not native to Africa. They wanted to say it would be an easy victory, but they dared not. If they said it was a difficult victory, it would not be to embolden other people's ambitions and destroy their own prestige. Simply, don't say anything. The speeches of the two ministers in succession made Finance Minister Tegela feel that if he didn't say anything, he would be classified as the Prime Minister, so he could only speak. I also support preparations for war against the Ottoman Empire, but the treasury needs to raise funds, so it is best if the war comes later. Well, Tegela's words almost made everyone present laugh. He actually said this, but others didn't understand it. Only Tegela knew that it was his sincere words. At present, raising enough funds is a big project for the Ministry of Finance. Without 2 or 3 years, it is simply impossible to fight the Ottoman Empire, no matter how much 1 billion lire is necessary. This is a rough estimate he gave, based on the previous 2 military operations. Now the Prime Minister was the only one who did not express his position. At this time, the shortcomings of his character were exposed. He was indecisive and panicked when he saw that others agreed. It happened that Carlo walked up the steps at this time. Prime Minister, do you also agree? Facing Carlo's question and the looks of others, Prime Minister Desperatus nodded with difficulty and uttered one word, yes. Chapter 192 Assigning Tasks. As the Prime Minister also agreed, Carlo breathed a sigh of relief. He did not want to have a dispute with the Prime Minister at this time, which would delay Italy's war preparations. Next, we need to move on to the next agenda. Thinking of this, Carlo continued. Your Excellency Tegela, your Ministry of Finance will find a way to raise 1.5 billion lire within 2 years to fund the war. Carlo's words made Tegela, the finance minister, almost jump. Your Majesty, this task is too difficult for our Ministry of Finance. If we want to raise an additional 1.5 billion lire, we must issue bonds, and it is completely impossible to keep the secret of such a scale of bonds. As finance minister, Tegela was very knowledgeable about bond issuances and believed that the figures given by Carlo were too high to be kept secret. Those old foxes in the capital market can smell the slightest sign of trouble. When faced with Tegela, Carlo was of course unwilling to lower his demands because he had prepared the funds based on the situation that everything was pretty good. This is already the minimum requirement in Carlo's heart, so Tegela is not given a chance to bargain. In this case, then we should create a clever name and issue debt in multiple batches. It was very rare to hear these words from Carlo, who was a king, and everyone in the venue was stunned. As for Tegela, this is even more true. Although he has done this before, he did it quietly in private. This is the first time he has seen the king do it so blatantly. Your Majesty, doing so will affect our country's reputation in the securities market. Tegela held it in for a long time before saying this. As long as we win, it won't affect our reputation. Carlo's statement is more straightforward, but he is right. As long as Italy can defeat the Ottomans, Italian bonds will remain strong. But if it fails, Spain will learn from its mistakes. But is it possible for Italy to fail? In Carlo's view, there is no such possibility. It's just a matter of big victory or small victory. What gives him confidence is Italy's national strength. Although Italy is at the bottom among the great powers, it is not something that the declining Ottoman can deal with. The Italian-Austrian War in the previous life was more about Italy's chicken stealing mentality and wanted to obtain the maximum results at the minimum cost. This kind of thinking also caused Italy to go into battle without adequate preparation. Moreover, the location he chose was wrong. Libya was a vast and sparsely populated place, making it a perfect place for guerrilla warfare. After procrastinating for a year and a half, it was only the Italian fleet that threatened the Black Sea Strait that made the Ottomans surrender. Of course, Carlo would not make such a mistake. He had his own ideas. Faced with such blatant words, Tegela didn't know what to say. After thinking for a long time, she could only respond silently. If you don't speak, it means you acquiesce. With this in mind, Carlo turned the topic to the Prime Minister. Although the Prime Minister just issued his own protest after the protest was ineffective, Carlo still had many problems that he needed to deal with. However, compared to threatening the Finance Minister, Carlo's tone this time was much better. After all, the Prime Minister wanted preferential treatment. Prime Minister Depretis. Next, I want public opinion to arouse hatred towards the Ottomans. In this regard, we can start with history and then gradually move to the present. And Carlo is now applying what he has learned. The Ottomans have harassed southern Italy quite a bit in history, not to mention fighting Venice for a century. With a little manipulation, the Italians, who are full of nationalist sentiments, can direct their anger towards the Near East sick man. Your Majesty, I will let the government provide guidance in this regard. The unflattering words from the Prime Minister declared his attitude. Facing the Prime Minister, who was a little moody, Carlo ignored him and set his sights on Foreign Minister Boccona. Your Excellency Boccona, your next task is very important. You need to try to win the support of the British. Even if you cannot win it, you need to ensure that they are neutral. Yes. Carlo believed that the British attitude was crucial in this war with the Ottomans. Although Italy has a good relationship with the United Kingdom, the Ottomans are the most important link in its containment of Russia. If the British think that the war between Italy and the Ottomans will affect the goal of locking the Russians in the Black Sea, something may happen. Okay, Your Majesty. As Foreign Minister, Boccona immediately agreed to Carlo's request. In addition, we can also make contact with Russia and the Balkan countries first, which is also good for us. After the Foreign Secretary finished speaking, Carlo did not forget to give some instructions, which shows that he attaches great importance to diplomacy. Of course, some people may ask, is there a country that has forgotten? What about France? Carlo certainly did not forget France, which had a huge influence in the Mediterranean. But it is a pity that Carlo believes that no matter what Italy does, France will intervene just like Italy did in the Sino-French War. In addition to Italy's blow to France in the Sino-French War, there is also the relationship between France and the Ottoman Empire. The relationship between the two countries can be traced back to the era of Louis XIV. Moreover, France has also had good interests in the Ottomans in recent years. Considering the relationship between France and Italy, even if Carlo is the leader of France, he will stumble in the battle between Italy and the Ottomans. Therefore, instead of focusing your limited energy on France, it is better to pay attention to the countries in the Balkan Peninsula. Among them, there must be countries that can be helpful to Italy. After the explanation with the government was completed, it was the turn of the army to directly participate in the war. Carlo then spoke to Admiral Gorek. When can the 3 launched Turin-class battleships join the Navy, and how long will it take for them to exert their due combat effectiveness? The Turin class mentioned by Carlo is the battleship that was previously tendered and has epoch-making significance, officially entering the pre-dreadnought era. At present, 3 warships have been launched and are in the process of installing weapons and debugging equipment. After sea trials, they can enter the Navy. Of course, if you want to develop combat effectiveness, you also need the hard training of all officers and soldiers on the ship. So faced with Carlo's question, Admiral Gorek answered carefully. If you want the 3 warships to enter service, you have to wait until next year. If you want to form sufficient combat effectiveness, you have to wait until the year after that. The time given by Admiral Gorek is considered fast. He has not yet taken into account the various problems that may arise in the warship. The biggest problem with the new warship, in addition to equipment, is design problems. Without any designer who can design a flawless battleship will have some problems. However, excellent designers basically only leave small problems that do not require major changes. As for mediocre designers, let the Navy officers and soldiers cry. Admiral Gorek's answer was quite satisfactory. Carlo said after thinking about it for a while, it's better to speed up the progress as much as possible. After talking about the Navy, next is the Army, which will inevitably become the protagonist of this war. However, when facing General Sergeant, Carlo didn't know what to say. In the final analysis, he still did not control the army and his influence on it was limited. But it's not good not to say anything. Why don't you start talking now? So Carlo could only start with equipment. General Saragut, I hope the army can complete the army's replacement in 2 years. The M88 Carcano rifle must be mastered by every soldier and put into battle. If there is anyone in this room who is most passionate about this war besides Carlo, then it is none other than Admiral Saragut. Because this seems to be a war in which the army plays the leading role, and it is also against the weakened Ottomans. Although the Italian army is not very strong in Europe, and is a bit difficult to deal with France and Austria-Hungary, it is still no problem to defeat the sick man of the Near East. Moreover, this war comes at the right time, which can completely improve the army's status in the minds of the people. For these military leaders, there is nothing more popular than war. If so, it is a war that is easy to win. So in the face of Carlo's request, Admiral Saragut stood up and patted his chest and said, Your Majesty, please rest assured that the army will definitely complete the change. We will intensify training and strive to let the Italian people see the army's style. Now that General Saragut has said this, what else can Carlo say? He can only give enough support. Since General Saragut has said this, I will ask the government to provide the army with sufficient funding in the next fiscal budget. Well, now that the government provides sufficient funding, and there are no checks and balances, the army's performance is worth looking forward to. There is one more chapter. The steamed buns will be coded as soon as possible. Chapter 193 Secret Preparations for War. With the end of this secret mobilization meeting against the Ottomans, preparations for war began across Italy. The Turin Arsenal, located in the east of Turin, was formerly the arsenal of the Kingdom of Sardinia, founded in 1716 by the government of the Kingdom of Sardinia. Later, after integrating several other weapons manufacturing factories, it became the main weapons supplier to the army of the Kingdom of Sardinia. After the unification of Italy, the Turin arsenal became one of the main arsenals of the Kingdom of Italy, undertaking nearly 30% of the army's weapons manufacturing tasks, and is currently the largest arsenal in Italy. In the rifle manufacturing workshop of the arsenal, brand new M88 Carcano rifles are being manufactured by workers themselves. As the general manager, Carvalho was inspecting the factory, the quality of the army's orders must be guaranteed. Last month, an accident occurred in which a soldier was injured while using a firearm. It was identified as a quality issue with a firearm. You must pay close attention to quality. I will not allow such an accident to happen again. Facing Carvalho's words, the head of the rifle manufacturing workshop kept nodding. General Manager, please rest assured that we have punished the person responsible for the gun and warned him that if such an accident occurs again, he will go home immediately. The words of the person in charge of the workshop made him very satisfied. Very good. Since I took over, I have been emphasizing quality. Only high quality can make us the first choice of the military. You must know that there are several arsenals behind us, and they are eyeing us. We must not relax in any way. After talking about quality issues, Carvalho casually asked the secretary behind him, by the way, what are Mr. Carcano busy with these days? As the general manager of the arsenal, Carvalho is very concerned about his factory's chief firearms designer. It's okay to not care about it. What if this master has a hot head and is poached by other arsenals, and he can't even find a place to cry? Facing his leader's inquiry, the secretary said quickly, Mr. Carcano has recently been analyzing the Beretta Arms Maxim machine gun. As soon as he heard that the chief gunsmith was not doing his job and began to study machine guns again, Carvalho had the urge to slap his forehead. Is it the latest Maxim machine gun? Yes, this is Beretta's latest Maxim machine gun. I heard that with a weight reduction of 2 kilograms, its reliability is 6% higher than the previous model. According to tests, it can shoot 96 times without interruption. Minutes are not stuck. As a qualified secretary, it is natural not to answer whatever you ask, but to tell the leader what he wants to know in advance. In this regard, Carvalho's secretary is very qualified. However, Carvalho did not pay attention to the problem of the secretary's qualifications. Instead, he felt very headache thinking that his opponent also had an excellent firearms designer. Of course, he was more envious. Unlike rifles, which are mass-produced guns, Beretta's machine guns are all about technical work, and they are a separate business. Why shouldn't he be envious of this? But there is no point in envying him unless his chief gunsmith can develop a work that is better than the Maxim machine gun. It is precisely because of this little expectation that he did not neglect Carcano's job. Without too much interference. While Carvalho was inspecting the arsenal, the office director hurried over. His running posture is a bit weird, like a bull with limbs running, and the sweat stains on his forehead are clearly visible, which is difficult for him to weigh 180 pounds. Before he even arrived, I heard his breathing sound like an aging blower. What's the matter, Raoul? Carvalho, who couldn't bear it, was considerate of his office director. Your Excellency, General Manager, this is a telegram from the military. It has added an order for 65,000 new rifles, and the time requirement is also very urgent. At this time, Carvalho no longer cared about his office director and immediately stepped forward to grab the telegram and read it carefully. This telegram was sent from the War Department, requiring the Turin arsenal to complete the Army's manufacturing task of 90,000 rifles and 18 million rounds of new 6.5mm round-head bullets before the end of 1889. It also specifically stated that, if the arsenal cannot be completed on time, the Army's weapons manufacturing tasks will be deprioritized in the future. This sentence was like a hard whip on Carvalho's butt, and he couldn't sit still immediately. He immediately spoke to the secretary behind him. Immediately summoned the directors of each workshop to the conference room for a meeting, as soon as possible. I'll do it right away. The secretary immediately trotted away. Then Carvalho said to the fat office director, immediately prepare a reward system for overtime work in each workshop. We will be very busy next. Do you feel confused when you see this word? This mere 90,000 rifles and 18 million rounds of rifle bullets will keep the Turin arsenal busy for more than a year. Isn't it an exaggeration? This is the largest arsenal in Italy. Yes, that's right. It just takes So long point. Although the Turin arsenal is the largest arsenal in Italy, it only has more than 200 employees, which is twice as few as the well-known Morsa arsenal. Moreover, in this era, there was no assembly line operation, which further slowed down the manufacturing speed of rifles. Not to mention that it is more troublesome to make your own bullets. I didn't expect that later generations would be so advanced. There are many countries that cannot make qualified bullets. I didn't mention your third brother put down the cow dung bomb. Therefore, this has also led to the slowdown in the production of rifles and bullets. Of course, there is also a more important problem, that is, Italian guns and other weapons are basically only supplied to the domestic army and there is no external market. The consequence of the absence of an external market is that the arsenal cannot get enough orders and can only reduce its size or merge several arsenals to create a large arsenal. While Italy chose the former, both have advantages and disadvantages, and currently Italy feels the disadvantage of a small arsenal, that is, the speed of weapons manufacturing cannot be increased. At this time, some people may ask, why not recruit more workers? Purchase more equipment, and expand production capacity. Let me tell you clearly that this is not possible. The reason is simple. It takes at least a year for a new employee to become a skilled arsenal veteran. And after the new employee becomes a veteran, the order is completed. So how should the arsenal support the extra employees and maintain the new equipment? This is the problem. Without a steady stream of orders, no one would dare to expand their factory. This wave of orders from the army alone will not allow several major arsenals to think about expanding personnel and equipment. Of course, we will not pursue the issue of the Italian arsenal. In addition to arsenals, there are also other companies that have also been urged by the military. As one of the manufacturers of Turin-class battleships, Andisha shipyard also received a telegram with the same meaning. But this time the urging telegram came from the Navy. The Navy requires us to speed up the outfitting and strive to conduct sea trials as soon as possible. In the office, the person in charge of the shipyard waved the telegram in his hand and loudly read the requirements from the Navy to the warship project supervisor. We're already fast enough. If something like this causes quality problems, it's not a joke. At this point, the project supervisor stepped forward and raised his own questions. Then, increase working hours, divide workers into 2 shifts, and let them work from 8 AM to 12 PM. This time, the Navy must feel the efforts of our shipyard. What the person in charge said at the end was very clear. That is, to reduce profits, we must also have a good relationship with the Navy. Of course, it was not just the Navy and Army that were making preparations in Italy. In the following period, some Ottoman jokes appeared in newspapers from time to time, usually political cartoons and some popular science jokes. At first, the people simply laughed at this as fun, but after a while, some historical descriptions of the Ottoman battlefields in Italy began to appear, but these were basically descriptions of battles between Venice and the Ottomans. Of course, this is just the beginning of the guidance of public opinion. If it continues, the Ottomans will be described as more and more hateful, and finally it will successfully arouse the anger of the people. Of course, now is not the time to stir up public anger, because Italy is still preparing. Chapter 194 The Bell of 1889. As Italy carried out secret preparations in an orderly manner, the time quickly approached the end of the year. During this period, something also happened. That is, the navy of the King Kingdom in the Far East was finally built. This Biang navy controlled by Li Zhangtang can be said to be the essence of King Navy ships. It has the 4 King Kong internal names, Dingyuan, flagship, Zhenyuan, Ziyuan, and Jingyuan 4 ships. Needless to say, the second ship Jingjing is among them, and the second ship Zijing is even more famous in the Far East. In addition to these 4 kings, the Biang Navy also has dome-protected cruisers, Jingyuan and Leiyuan, the original Ziyuan class dome-protected cruisers in history. Their main mission is to compete with Ziyuan and Jingyuan. The ship formed a fast cruiser formation and was responsible for the second ship Zijing, and the Jiyuan ship, due to insufficient speed, it was not included in the fast cruiser formation. Crash cruiser, Yangli, Chaoyang, coastal defense ironclad ship, Pingyan, unprotected cruisers, Weiyuan, Kangji, and gunboats, Kojiang, Mian, Zhenhai, Taín and other torpedo boats, Menelaus, transport ships and other ships, with a total tonnage of more than 45,000 tons. Although a fleet of such a tonnage is not particularly powerful in Europe, in the Far East, it can outlast the rest. Even the major powers do not have a fleet of such a tonnage in the Far East. Moreover, most of its naval ships were newly built in the past 10 years, and the newer weapons and equipment of the warships are also very good. For this reason, Colonel Antonio, who is currently teaching in the Biang fleet, made some comments on the officers and soldiers of the Biang Navy in a telegram sent to China. Dear Admiral Garlock, I have served the King Northern Fleet in the Far East for almost 4 years, and I have a deep understanding of the officers and soldiers of the fleet. The officers and soldiers of the fleet are generally very good, and they have met the strict requirements of consultants from various countries. Next, all skills are well trained, and can reach 70% of the level of domestic officers and soldiers. This indicator refers to the grassroots officers and soldiers on the ship. The middle and higher level officers and soldiers on the ship are lower, reaching about 60% of our country. Of course, I think this is more, because they lack proper training. The Qing dynasty's Northern Fleet was somewhat resistant to projects that required high costs. This is also closely related to the fact that Governor Li, the actual controller of the fleet, is short of money. In addition, the fleet also has a big problem, that is, the fleet commander Ding Rucheng is from the army and does not know much about the various regulations and measures of the navy. His orders basically come from the hands of the general advisor, Colonel Lang Weili. Such a result is very worrying. Moreover, Colonel Lang Weili did not have a very good relationship with the middle and upper level commanders of the Qing dynasty. He was personally strict and unkind, which was somewhat unusual for a humanistic society like China. In addition, the officers and soldiers of the Northern Fleet are basically from the Fujian area. This kind of fleet officers and soldiers all come from the same region, which is also not conducive to future joint naval operations. It can be seen that Colonel Antonio has a very thorough understanding of the Biang fleet, which of course has a lot to do with the fact that he is a bystander. Of course, this is just an episode at the end of the year, and in addition to the formation of the Northern Fleet in the Far East, Italy's domestic development is also continuing. This year, Italy's fiscal revenue reached a new high of 1.518 billion lire, the highest in history. The increase in government revenue also comes from the development of industry. Demand for electricity from Italian industry has surged this year. Currently, the State Grid Corporation of China has 47 thermal power plants and 2 hydroelectric power stations across the country, which can provide Italy with 2.14 million kilowatt-hours of electricity every year, making it the largest consumer of electricity in Europe. Of course, this is not all of the state grid. In the new year, the company has formulated ambitious plans to increase its power generation to 3 million kilowatt-hours. Strive to initially meet the electricity needs of Italian industry. That's right, it initially meets industrial electricity needs. Speaking of the role of electricity in promoting industry, everyone can see it. At present, companies that want to get electricity are like crucian carp crossing the river. The state grid is also working overtime to expand the capacity of its own power plants. However, the demand was too great, so it worked hard to expand the power generation capacity, but it has never been able to keep up with the demand for electricity. The great development of electric power in Italy has also played a leading role. At present, other European countries have also begun to use electricity, but their scale and power plants are not as good as those in Italy. But it is certain that the great development of electric power in Europe has already started. Of course, Westinghouse Electric, which produces various AC motors, can naturally get a share of the pie. In addition to electricity, Italian agriculture is also doing very well this year, except for grapes. European grapes have been generally attacked by diseases and insect pests this year, and grape production in various countries has been significantly reduced. Among them, Italian wine production has dropped by 1/3 compared with last year. Of course, this is not just Italy, but this is basically the case in other European countries. Therefore, the price of wine has risen sharply this year, but even at such a high price, the wine exported by Italy has plummeted, because Italians, like the French, are fond of wine and regard it as a necessity in life. No matter what they do, they need it. Have a glass of wine. The absence of wine as a major item has led to a decline in agricultural exports. Fortunately, industrial and re-export trade are still good, so Italy's imports and exports still maintain growth point. Although Italy's fiscal revenue is growing this year's expenditure is even more intense, reaching 1.979 billion lire, and the fiscal deficit has reached an unprecedented 451 million lire. Such a large deficit makes Italy's finances even more difficult point. But no matter how difficult it is, we have to do it, and the Ministry of Finance is extremely busy. After several revisions, a financial statement that looked pretty good was released. For example, the additional training expenses and weapons procurement expenses allocated by the Army and Navy are listed under other names. If there is no one with the bottom order, you will never be able to see the floor point. Although the Ministry of Finance has succeeded this year, it will be more difficult in the next 2 years, because government spending will further expand, and the size of the deficit will also be the same. These expenses have been invested in secret war preparations by Italy, so they need to continue to be covered up. In addition, on the military side, in addition to purchasing equipment, the Army and Navy are also strengthening their training. The Army held 2 consecutive exercises this year, a division-level confrontation and a corps-level confrontation. Lost money. As for the Navy, it frequently dispatches warships to conduct continuous operations, searches, and escorts at sea, striving to allow officers and soldiers to better perform their duties. Of course, no matter what, 1888 passed like this. The new year is coming, and as King Carlo, he needs to lead the Italian ship, to ride the wind and waves and sail in a powerful direction. Chapter 195 Sophia's mysterious figure. In 1889, a new year began. Stefan Stambolov ended his busy day at work. He left the Prime Minister's office under the protection of his bodyguards, and took a carriage ready to drive all the way to his home. Stambolov sat in the car with his eyes closed to relax his tired brain after a day's work. This Stefan Stambolov is no ordinary figure. He is the current Prime Minister of Bulgaria, and he is the one who supported the new King Ferdinand I to succeed him. It is no exaggeration to say that he is currently the #1 person in Bulgarian politics. What is even more enviable is that compared with prime ministers in other countries who are in their 50s or 60s, Stambolov, who is only 35 years old, can be said to be terrifyingly young. The reason for this is not only his outstanding ability, known as the Bulgarian Bismarck, but also his unparalleled luck and keen judgment. When Bulgaria became independent in 1878, he was just a young and outrageous member of parliament, and by 1884 he became the speaker. Then in 1886, a group of pro-Russian Bulgarian officers launched a coup and expelled Grand Duke Alexander I from the country. At this time, Stambolov stood up. He used public opinion and the heavy pressure of the people to force the officers of the coup to return power to the parliament. It was precisely by virtue of his status as speaker that Stambolov then selected new monarchs from various countries. Finally, Prince Ferdinand from the Saxe-Coburg-Gotha-Kohary family became the new king of Bulgaria. During this period, he withstood the pressure from Russia, so much so that Russian Foreign Minister Gorchakov once said angrily, "The fruits of the war between Russia and the Ottomans were stolen by the thief Stambolov." Whatever the Russians thought, Stambolov removed Bulgaria from the possibility of Russian control. This is very important to the Bulgarians, because it allows them to gain independent power. Of course, when you gain independent power, you will also lose some, but it is worth it. When Stambolov arrived at his home, he saw the housekeeper looking around at the door, waiting for someone. When he saw Stambolov, his eyes immediately lit up. "What's wrong?" Seeing the butler's expression, Stambolov asked curiously. The butler said in his ear, "The Italian ambassador Mr. Toledo is here for a visit. He has been here for half an hour." Italians visiting. This news surprised Stambolov, because Bulgaria has little contact with the Italians, but has a good relationship with Romania next door. At this time, Stambolov had an idea: just one ambassador. No, in addition to the Toledo ambassador, there is another person with him. It seems that he is not the ambassador's entourage. The news told by the butler made him even more confused. But no matter what, since the Italian ambassador came to visit his home, he should receive him and see what medicine he was selling in his good. Stambolov quickly walked to the door and immediately put on a smile. As soon as he entered the door, he saw the Italian ambassador in the living room and the visitor sitting with him. Ambassador Toledo, you are very welcome to my humble home. Facing Stambolov's enthusiastic expression, Ambassador Toledo stood up together with the mysterious visitor. This is a very presumptuous visit, and I hope your excellency the prime minister can forgive me. The words from Ambassador Toledo immediately made the atmosphere in the living room warm. Taking advantage of this opportunity, Stambolov observed this mysterious visitor. He is not tall, looks ordinary, and is about 40 years old. This is his first impression. As if seeing that Stambolov was interested in the people around him, Toledo, the ambassador, immediately introduced. This is my colleague and friend in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, His Excellency Yasinimir. He is this time we are traveling on vacation. Considering our professional habits, we would like to pay a visit to the Prime Minister. I hope you don't mind our presumptuous visit. Facing Toledo's introduction, Stambolov reached out and shook Mayor's hand. You are very welcome to travel to Bulgaria. If you have any difficulties during the journey, you can report it directly to the local government. They will definitely make you feel at home. After a brief chat to close the relationship between the two, Stambolov asked, you two are visiting me this time. Do you have any business with me? As the Prime Minister of Bulgaria, Stambolov, although he does not have everything on his plate, he does have a lot of things going on. The subtext of his asking was that if the two of you are fine, then go to bed early. Everyone has already met each other, so there is no need to chat. Following his words, the middle-aged man named Mayor, a colleague of the ambassador, immediately spoke. Your Excellency Prime Minister, I personally admire your country's ability to get rid of Russia's control. However, although the Berlin Conference in 1978 allowed your country to gain independence, it still has shortcomings. That is to include the Treaty of San Stefano in Great Bulgaria has given up, which is a pity. Faced with Mayor's words, even as Prime Minister, Stambolov couldn't contain his emotions. There is no way. This will always be a pain in the hearts of Bulgarians. The failure to unify all of Macedonia and parts of Thrace and unify the entire Bulgarian nation into one country is a loss for all Bulgarians. Although Stambolov currently has a good relationship with the Ottomans, in order to counter the pressure from Russia, who doesn't want to expand the territory and take back what originally belonged to the King of Bulgaria, I'm sorry, our country has a good relationship with the Ottoman Empire, and your word should not have been said at all. After all, he was called the Bismarck of Bulgaria. Stambolov responded quickly. He immediately declared the friendly relations between Bulgaria and the Ottomans in a righteous manner. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend the relationship between your country and the Ottomans, nor did I have any intention to provoke relations between them. Seeing that Stambolov was a little unhappy, Mayor immediately apologized. It's nothing, I just need to pay attention. Faced with Mayor's apology, Stambolov graciously let it go. However, I think your country can discuss with the Ottomans about the Bulgarians living in Macedonia at an appropriate time in the future. I think your country should strengthen its ties with them, so that these Bulgarians abroad can be more concerned about their motherland. At this time, Mayor suddenly said something again, which completely angered Stambolov. He stood up immediately. Although he did not say it clearly, the meaning was very clear. He did not welcome the visit of the two of them. Faced with the attitude of the Bulgarian Prime Minister, the two could only leave in despair. What's going on, Your Excellency Mayor? Why did you anger the Prime Minister of Bulgaria as soon as you arrived? I'm wondering if you are from our Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Although you brought Your Excellency Jiminy Bacona with you, you asked me to fully cooperate with you. Order, but I will report to Rome truthfully what happened today. After sitting back in the carriage, Ambassador Toledo completely exploded. He had such poor senses for the person in front of him that he didn't even say a word to him. Facing the ambassador's scolding, Mayor acted like a normal person and was still in the mood to enjoy the night view outside the window. However, his bright and interesting expression betrayed his mood. As for the Prime Minister's office, Stambolov, who was angry just now, is very calm now. He is thinking about the purpose of these two people, but he has too little information and cannot analyze anything. Now that the analysis has revealed something, let's have people investigate this guy named Mayor. He always feels that he doesn't seem to be friends with the Italian ambassador. As for the reason, it may be self-consciousness, but in addition, he also gave instructions to the butler. If that person named Yasinimir comes to me again, I will still entertain him warmly. Stamber laughs. Words surprised the steward. If he hadn't seen the Prime Minister get angry with his own eyes just now, he would have thought that the two parties had a good conversation point. However, good habits allowed him to put aside his doubts and answer seriously. As you command, Prime Minister. Chapter 196 Exercise. Trento is located in the middle of the Alps and is the capital of the Trentino region in Italy. Although it is one of the 13 regions, Trentino has a very small population, with currently less than 200,000 people. Compared with other large areas with millions of people, it can be described as vast and sparsely populated. Moreover, the Trentino region has always been at the bottom of the economic rankings, and the locals are used to it. However, although it is located in a mountainous area, it is strategically very important to Italy, because it is the barrier for the three major industrial towns in the north. There are quite a few troops stationed here. Of course, there are also many army training bases here. At least the army's mountain combat training is basically conducted here. Among them, the Valsugana training ground located 15 kilometers east of Trento is the largest mountain warfare training ground in Italy. The training ground covers an area of 38 square kilometers and has the most complex mountain terrain. It is a great place for training officers and soldiers. But today, the Valsugana training ground was bustling with activity because two troops were conducting a military exercise, simulating offensive and defensive drills in the mountains. Among them, the 8th Division of the 3rd Army was responsible for the attack, and its commander was Major General Pascal, who had made great achievements in the Ethiopian War. In addition to the 8th Division, the troops under his command also reinforced an artillery regiment. The officers and soldiers of the 8th Division were attacking the mountain under the direction of their division commander. Their offensive movements were extremely skillful, and the cooperation between the soldiers was also very tacit. It can be seen that the division worked hard under the leadership of its commander. As for the defensive troops from the 11th Division of the 4th Army, they were also not weak. Under the leadership of the division commander Major General Carlo, they had been stubbornly resisting the attack of the 8th Division. The two sides were busy going back and forth, and Carlo and the military generals at the exercise headquarters used high-powered binoculars to carefully observe the fighting process between the two sides. The messengers, on the other hand, kept reporting the current situation on the battlefield to the exercise headquarters, reporting that the 1st Brigade and 2nd Regiment of the 8th Division have broken through position 1057. They are leading a detour to the right flank of the defenders under the leadership of their regiment commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herin. The number of casualties on both sides. The attacking 8th Division suffered 614 killed, and the defending 11th Division suffered 749 killed. Following the messenger's report, a staff officer immediately appeared in front of the sand table and changed position 1057 to red, representing the attacking side. As for the casualty figures, they were registered on the casualty panels of both sides. This panel is very user-friendly and marked with red and blue colors. The numbers on it are red 4571 and blue 5843. This can completely intuitively see which unit has more combat effectiveness. Of course, this is just the current state of affairs, and no one knows the final outcome before the fight is over. At the observatory, Carlo took his eyes off the high-powered telescope and patted the shoulder of Lieutenant General Simone behind him. The battle was exciting, and you trained well, although Carlo is suspected of making up the numbers. After all, he doesn't know much about military matters. But no matter what, there are some things that even ordinary people can feel. Who is stronger between the two sides? Although the 8th Division is equipped with an extra artillery regiment, it is on the offensive side. It can make the casualties of the offensive side less than that of the defensive side. Doesn't this explain the problem? Not to mention that this is a mountainous offensive and defensive battle, which further deepens the impression. I didn't see Lieutenant General Basil, the commander of the 4th Army, on the other side, who looked unhappy. This was obvious evidence. Faced with Carlo's compliment, Lieutenant General Simeon smiled slightly, but did not speak. It is best not to speak at this time, otherwise it will be interpreted too much in public. Carlo had no intention of making it difficult for Simeon. After he only praised him, he looked at Admiral Surrogate, who was still observing beside him. Admiral Surrogate, this kind of drill needs to be done more often. Carlo's words made the Minister of War take off his observation glasses. He looked at the king in front of him and said helplessly, "Your Majesty, such a division-level confrontation exercise costs 2.6 million lire. The army can hold up to 4 such exercises and confrontations a year. Yes, the army is very generous this year and can spend 10 million liras for exercises." Hearing the complaints from the Minister of War, Carlo simply ignored them. Neither the navy nor the army were fuel efficient. Currently, Italy's finances are limited, and it is impossible to give an extra lira to both sides. Admiral Surrogate, why didn't you see the throwable grenade I mentioned last time being used in this exercise? Didn't you say it has been developed? That's right. What Carlo talks about is the grenade that future soldiers will have to have. This weapon was actually very common 80 years ago. The image that describes Napoleon's bravery is that Napoleon marches with tall grenadiers. Grenadiers throw grenades. In modern times, this thing gradually disappeared from sight until the range of guns became farther and farther in the future. However, with the development of the times, handheld grenades that were originally very large can now be designed to be very small. The grenade currently developed according to Carlo's requirements is less than 1 kilogram, which allows an ordinary soldier to throw it 20 meters away. This grenade, tentatively named M89, is a handle-shaped grenade, which is composed of a charge body, a detonating device and a wooden handle. Its total weight is 0.78 kilograms, warhead weight 0.23 kilograms, total length 385 millimeters, diameter 75 millimeters, detonation time 5 seconds. That's right, it's the familiar long-handled grenade. This grenade has the advantages of long throw distance and accurate throwing, which is very important for the current Italian army. Facing Carlo's question, Admiral Surrogate shook his head and answered, "Your Majesty, this weapon has only been developed for more than a month. The soldiers are still getting familiar with it. In order to avoid accidents, it will not be used in this exercise." Faced with the Minister of War's explanation, Carlo acquiesced. "Well, I hope I can see the soldiers using it skillfully during the next exercise." Unexpectedly, Carlo's words made the Minister of War feel embarrassed. That might be a little difficult. Why? Carlo was surprised by the words of the Minister of War. "Your Majesty, please listen to me. We are still exploring how to use this grenade. How should we use it? Should we concentrate it or distribute it to each soldier? In addition, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this thing for our tactics? This is very important." Facing the words of the Minister of War, Carlo took a deep breath and answered, "The Minister of War is right. We do need to be more cautious. But I think 1 year should be enough. Almost, that's enough." After talking about this grenade, Carlo's original intention of asking about the mortar faded away. "This is just because I'm anxious. What can I do if others are not anxious? When the time comes, everything will depend on the results. It's too early to say anything now." After discussing with the Minister of War, Carlo, who felt a little uninterested, returned to Rome. After watching the exercise, it was a great honor to the army that he was able to come and watch the exercise despite his busy schedule. Hope there is good news in Rome. If you're listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means they downloaded and uploaded it without effort. We cordially invite you to visit our channel, Mundo Fanfic Novelos. There you'll find the original version of this story and you can explore many other novels of various genres. We're waiting for you to immerse yourself in a world of incredible novels. Chapter 197 London. There is still a bit of cold wind in London in March, but the breath of spring is already strong. A large number of Londoners go out for an outing and enjoy the charming scenery of Spring Point, but all this was too luxurious for Robert Gascoigne Cecil, the British Prime Minister. He didn't have the time to waste time on such things. For Prime Minister Cecil, who is already forming a cabinet for the second time, his numerous government affairs leave him no time, because he has his own big moves both internally and externally. Internally, He adopted a high-pressure policy towards Ireland, and opposed William Ewart Gladstone's Irish Home Rule policy. Last year, he reformed local self-government institutions to create county councils elected by taxpayers externally. He focused on plundering colonies in Asia, capture Burma; in West Africa, conquer Nigeria, capture Kenya, and enter Uganda; and in South Africa, capture Rhodesia. He was an imperialist who believed that the progressive backward races must go through the stage of European rule, especially the British, and that this stage must be maintained by force. His mission was to expand and defend the British Empire. In these respects, he is a chauvinist. However, when it comes to European affairs, he has adopted a model of staying away from bystanders and arbitration, and continues to maintain Britain's independence in Europe. Of course, this has also been the policy of the United Kingdom. It has stayed away from European affairs, which can benefit the United Kingdom a lot. Prime Minister Cecil is currently in the Prime Minister's office at number 10 Downing Street, busy handling affairs, when there is a knock on the door. "What's up, Cecil?" put down his pen, and asked. The secretary's voice came from outside the door. "Prime Minister, Italian Foreign Minister Boccona has arrived. I'll be right away." After answering the secretary, Cecil closed a document he had just signed, took his coat off the hanger, and put it on. "Hello, Lord Boccona. Welcome to London." In the reception room, the slightly fat Prime Minister Cecil greeted the visiting Boccona. After both of them were seated, the Prime Minister of the British Empire continued. "The main thing I want to discuss with you here is that your country's colonial actions in East Africa have threatened the Berlin Conference. The part that should not be obtained by your country has appeared in the middle reaches of the Tana River, Tana in Kenya River, and your country's affiliated Ethiopian troops also appeared near Garissa upstream. Does this mean that your country intends to not abide by the agreements between various countries?" Faced with Prime Minister Cecil's immediate questioning, Boccona, as the foreign minister, complained a little that the East African Governor General always caused trouble for him. Yes, it is the energetic Governor Antonio who is expanding his colonial scope in East Africa, and his current main direction of expansion is the interior of Kenya. That has not yet been occupied by the British. Due to the expansion of the British around the world, the current colonial pace in Africa is not as good as other countries. However, with hundreds of years of accumulation, the British colony in Africa is still the largest. Of course, countries are now accelerating their march into the interior, and this time Prime Minister Cecil summoned the Italian Foreign Minister, and also had the idea of opening the way for the Double C Plan. From Cairo to Cape Town, just thinking about it is so exciting. Prime Minister Cecil, our country has no plans in this regard. This may be caused by the lost colonial team using the wrong map. Please also believe that Italy has no intention of peeking into your country's southwest Africa. At most, our country can. Only when you reach the Tana River, you will never cross it. It was obvious that, although Boccona was complaining, it was unlikely that Italy would retreat. Because this is not only related to Italy's interests, but also to issues of prestige. A country like this is not worthy of being called a great power. At least there must be enough benefits to make Italy spit out the meat it eats. But you have crossed the line. According to the requirements of the Berlin Conference, you should not appear there. Don't forget that our country has withdrawn from Berbera in East Africa. You should keep this in mind. It was clear that Prime Minister Cecil didn't accept this. He continued. In addition, we discovered that the Sudanese rebels suddenly had a batch of weapons. At this point, I hope you understand that the British Empire will not tolerate those rebels. Well, Prime Minister Cecil said another thing that made Boccona even more unable to face it. Needless to say, it goes without saying who did it. Prime Minister Cecil, please believe that our country does not have any ideas about your country's sphere of influence. At present, our colonies in Africa have met our needs. I can give a written guarantee on this. These words gave Prime Minister Cecil a hint of sincerity, and taking advantage of this momentum, Boccona continued to strike while the railroad was hot. In fact, since our country's war with Ethiopia, our country has felt that its colonization in East Africa has reached its limit. Our country's financial and national strength do not support continued expansion into the interior of Africa. Okay, this is half true and half false. It is true that we are unwilling to continue to expand colonization, but it is too much to reach the limit. If a borderless land like Lanfang appeared, Italy would run faster than anyone else. When faced with Boccona, Cecil, as the British Prime Minister, reluctantly agreed. Of course, if the Italians are still making small moves in private, then don't blame him for letting them know how powerful the British Empire is. Although Italy's performance on weekdays is pretty good, its actions in Africa have made his senses worse. After seeing Prime Minister Cecil's acquiescent attitude, Boccona began to consider how to stop talking about the Ottoman issue. After some consideration, Boccona decided to start with Russia. Your Excellency Prime Minister, although our country may have a small misunderstanding with your country on African issues, Italy has always regarded your country as a true friend. Boccona himself didn't believe what he said, but in order to achieve his goal, there was nothing to care about. But our country is currently discovering a problem. France and Russia are rapidly approaching each other, which makes our country very worried. Boccona's words made Cecil and other British prime ministers look unhappy. There is nothing to say about Britain's attitude towards France. If it is not a friend, it is half an enemy. Although the two countries fought the Crimean War together, France has always been the focus of the British attention. Among other things, its navy, ranked second in the world, is what the British Empire must guard against. As for Russia, let alone the whole world surrounding Russia, the ambition of polar bears can be smelled halfway across Europe. The two countries were mixed together, and the British Empire had to be prepared. Let me add that at present in London, His Excellency Joseph Chamberlain is proposing an alliance with Germany. It was Arthur Neville Chamberlain who proposed the Commonwealth, and would implement the policy of appeasement in the future, and he was his son. This is a star politician in the UK, and he has countless controversies. Of course, the most important thing is that his thoughts have influenced many people in later generations. In addition to his son and nephew, well-known politicians such as Churchill have learned a lot from him. Boccona's words made Prime Minister Cecil think for a while, and then he asked, "I wonder where your country got the news." Cecil's question let Boccona know that this was the British Prime Minister and he believed it. "Your Excellency Cecil, this is the news that our country learned from secret channels. As you know, our country's relationship with France is not very good, so we are more concerned about France's trends." Speaking of this, the figure of his own monarch appeared in Boccona's mind. Yes, this is again the work of someone. As for the secret diplomacy conducted by various countries now, no matter how much it is kept secret, it will be revealed in later generations, let alone such a major event as the Franco-Russian alliance. Of course, when needed, using this as a bargaining chip can still contribute to Italy. No, as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, His Excellency Cecil is thinking about the impact of this on the United Kingdom. I think Joseph Chamberlain was definitely the best statesman in the late Victorian period. If he were to lead the government, it would be possible for the British Empire to become the Commonwealth instead of becoming an empty title. Chapter 198 Negotiation. Thank you very much for the information from your country. Although it has not been verified, Prime Minister Cecil, who has a good education, still expressed his gratitude. "It's nothing. Our country has the same worries about this." Boccona made a sympathetic comment, and the conversation became better. Having a common enemy can indeed build relationships, not only for individuals, but also for countries. Feeling that the time was ripe, Boccona took the initiative to focus on France and Russia. "Actually, our country believes that we are not too worried about the proximity of Russia and France, because it is located in Western Europe, and is surrounded by my country and Germany to balance it, so the French should not make any surprising moves. However, the Russians are not to that's easy to say at this point." It was natural for Boccona to stop there. As for Prime Minister Cecil, he heard the mysterious sound and knew the elegant meaning, but Britain did not have much to do with Russia. This European steamroller spanning Asia and Europe has always been a headache for the British Empire. Greed and insatiable appetite have always given Russia a bad reputation in Europe. Although there had been the Crimean War before, Britain and France worked together to teach this arrogant polar bear a lesson. but the subsequent 10th Turkish-Russian War showed that the Russians had completely healed their scars and forgotten the pain point. Thinking of this, Cecil couldn't help but sigh. The Russians are really troublesome to the civilized world. At this time, Bacona took the opportunity to speak. The ambitions of the Russians are known throughout Europe. They want Warsaw and Constantinople. Now that they have obtained Warsaw, the next step should be Constantinople. We must take precautions against this. Facing Bacona's words, Cecil was somewhat silent, because this was an obligation for the British Empire. You must know that the UK has always refused to be involved in the affairs of the European continent, and if the UK is held responsible for this, it will inevitably let them get into the muddy waters of European affairs. As Prime Minister, Cecil certainly didn't want to see it. He hesitated for a while and then spoke. Your Excellency Bacona, you must know that the treaty signed between our country and your country and Austria-Hungary 2 years ago has already made the Russians retreat in the face of difficulties. If they continue to want to sign a new treaty because of Russia, our people may not be willing to sign a new treaty. See, Cecil obviously misunderstood what Bacona meant. He thought that Bacona wanted to drag Britain into the water and re-sign a treaty against Russia. During the Bulgarian crisis, because Ferdinand I ascended the throne of Bulgaria, Britain, Italy, and Austria-Hungary signed a Mediterranean treaty, mainly to deal with possible Russian intervention in Bulgaria. In this treaty, Britain had almost no responsibilities, and Italy and Austria were mainly responsible. Obviously, Cecil believed that this was Italy's dissatisfaction with Britain's failure to assume its obligations, and he intended to drag Britain back into troubled waters. But, Your Excellency, that was 2 years ago. France and Russia were not so close 2 years ago. At that time, we only had to deal with the pressure from Russia. But now we have more potential opponents. It is impossible to be the same. Facing Cecil, who refused to accept the attack, Bacona wanted to throw the blame on the opponent, but this has not reached the point where we need to re-sign the treaty. Even if France and Russia really form an alliance, we can wait until the treaty expires and then renegotiate. Prime Minister Cecil, who was an excellent push-hand player, simply refused to accept this move. Faced with Cecil's roguelike behavior, Bacona no longer wanted to provoke him, so he spoke immediately. Our country believes that under the current circumstances, if we want to continue to lock Russia in the Black Sea, we must add another layer of insurance. Facing Bacona's words, Cecil asked with interest, then what do you think of your country? Our country believes that at present, the Ottomans simply cannot bear the heavy responsibility of blocking Russia, and it is necessary to add an insurance policy. Facing Bacona's words, Cecil did not speak, but continued to wait for the next step. Seeing that the Prime Minister of the British Empire was motionless, Bacona lost a bit of momentum. But there is no way. The British must agree to this matter, or at least acquiesce, otherwise this war will not be fought at all. Our country believes that if we want to block the Russians in the Black Sea, we cannot rely on the Ottomans themselves. It is best to add a powerful country to the region. And our country is very honored and willing to assume this responsibility. Ha. Ha ha ha. Facing Bacona's words, Prime Minister Cecil suddenly burst out laughing with joy. His expression was as if he had seen something very funny, and he was not fake at all. Facing the hearty laughter of Prime Minister Cecil, Bacona knew what the other party was laughing at. He was laughing at Italy's overestimation of its capabilities. Prime Minister Cecil's unabashed laughter can tell how much Britain attaches importance to Italy. After Prime Minister Cecil stopped speaking, he spoke with a hint of apology. I'm sorry, I just thought of a funny thing, and couldn't hold it back. I lost my temper. Although Bacona wanted to ask him if his wife had given birth to a child, considering the relationship between the two countries and the fact that he wanted to ask for help, he could only choose to be generous. Nothing. I believe this must be a very joyful thing. After exposing this embarrassment, Cecil continued to ask, I think your country plans to go to war with the Ottomans, and seeking help from our country is the purpose of your visit. Seeing his purpose, Cecil pointed it out without hesitation. As a qualified diplomat, Bacona immediately considered the gains and losses in his mind. Yes, I admit that our country does have this idea, but considering the current situation in the Eastern Mediterranean, I think it is necessary to do so. The corrupt bureaucrats of the Ottoman Empire have always been unwilling to make progress. Our country believes that instead of letting them, if we continue to be swallowed up by Russia, it is better for us to take action first. Of course, your country's opinion is the most important, and our country will also respect the interests of the British Empire. This is Bacona's way of expressing Italy's attitude to Britain. I respect Britain's opinions, and am willing to guarantee Britain's interests in exchange for Britain's acquiescence. Faced with Bacona's words, Cecil stood up and looked motionless at the portrait of St. George slaying the dragon in the living room. As the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Bacona certainly knew what the other party was thinking, so he didn't dare to interrupt. Then the entire living room immediately became quiet, and apart from the ticking of the clock, there was also a solid atmosphere in the air. Not long after, Prime Minister Cecil suddenly turned and looked at him. Your country needs to withdraw from the Tanner River Basin, and Crete must be autonomous. The other conditions are the conditions your country has promised. Obviously, this is the bottom line given by the British. Faced with Prime Minister Cecil's words, Bacona thought about it and said, our country agrees with your proposal in principle, but the specific decision still needs the approval of Rome. Go ahead, I'll wait for your news. After sending Bacona away, Prime Minister Cecil looked at the oil painting with a trace of ridicule and said softly, even Italy wants to do the Balkans. It's really lively here. That's right. In his opinion, Italians have no idea how much they weigh. It's not that easy to get out of that broken place in the Balkans. Chapter 199 Turin-class battleship. Prime Minister Cecil's request was quickly sent back to Rome. Faced with the conditions proposed by the British, Carlo immediately summoned his ministers to discuss how to respond. Everything else is easy to say. Why should Crete be granted autonomy? Just because of a word from the British? Moreover, everyone knows what the situation is in Crete. If it is autonomy, then it is not given to you, a Greek. As the Minister of War of Italy, I will never tolerate this happening. Faced with the British conditions, the first person to stand up and express his dissatisfaction was the Minister of War, General Saragut. Since someone started it, other people also have the same idea, as the Lord of the Navy. Although our Navy is not as powerful as the British, I would like to state here that the British conditions are a bit excessive. Crete must be autonomous, and our Navy cannot agree to it. Admiral Gorek's words were somewhat untrue, because it is impossible for the Italian Navy to offend the British at present, but on this occasion, he must make his political stance clear. So after the Minister of War spoke, he immediately picked up. Anyway, this is just a statement of attitude, and it's not really like following this method immediately. Sure enough, after the two military officers expressed their dissatisfaction, Desperatus, as Prime Minister, immediately stood up. Although I don't know what the mentality of the two servants is, this matter must be discussed. If there is no support or acquiescence from the British, then your idea of defeating the Ottomans can be put to rest. Our country cannot deal with several countries at the same time. We must isolate the Ottomans, otherwise I will not be optimistic about your actions, especially the war on land. Yes, as Prime Minister, Desperatus believes that the two military leaders have gone too far. At this time, shouldn't the first priority be to reduce their potential enemies? Moreover, he believes that the British demands are not excessive. The location of Crete is too important. If Italy obtains it, it will not only threaten the Black Sea and the Aegean Sea, but also the East-West China Sea. This will in turn create a stalemate with the United Kingdom. Good relationship. Some gains outweigh the losses, but his words were of no use to the two military generals, who refused to listen at all. Faced with the shouting of the two military bosses, other government officials gave up and immediately stepped forward to defend the Prime Minister. Although many people are not of the same faction as the Prime Minister, and some even have opposing views, everyone is very clear-headed and knows the difference between military and political affairs. In order to ensure the government's status and prevent the military's wishes from being achieved, senior government officials immediately united. Faced with such a situation, the two military bosses are no match for senior government officials. Even in a wheel battle, they can defeat them. Therefore, the two generals who were at a disadvantage could only turn their attention to Carlo, hoping that the king would come off the field to help them. However, Carlo had already considered the pros and cons at this time and was not willing to wade into this muddy water. In the end, the government won. Faced with this situation, Carlo took advantage of the situation. Now that the decision has been made, send a telegram to Foreign Minister Bacona and ask him to talk to the British again. It is best to get better conditions. If not, then follow this method. With Carlo's final word, the topic of the dispute ended. In fact, on the issue of Crete's autonomy, Carlo had many ways to prevent it from returning to the hands of the Greeks. Anyway, there is still time enough for Italy to find a group of suitable agents on the island. In addition, when the time comes to conquer Crete, there are countless ways to transform the island. Of course, this is based on the premise that Italy is not prepared to annex. With Carlo's decision, the meeting came to an end. The important ministers were in 2s and 3s, holding their things and preparing to leave the meeting room. Admiral Gorek, like the others, was ready to pack up and leave, but he was stopped. Admiral Gorek, please wait. Carlo's words left him with no choice but to wait for others to leave first. However, the Minister of War, General Surrogate, looked unhappy. When he walked past him, he snorted heavily with his nostrils. Of course, Admiral Garlic knew the reason. Wasn't it because Carlo was close to their navy? This naturally made the army unhappy. In addition, he was often summoned alone, which made the army even more talkative. They did not dare to express their dissatisfaction with Carlo, so Admiral Garlic, as the Minister of the Navy, acted as the perfect scapegoat. After everyone else had left, Carlo asked, "I heard that the new warship has been re-entered the dock for renovation. What is going on? Will it affect the service time of the warship?" Admiral Gorek was not surprised at all by the king's inquiry. "Even though I only knew about this situation less than 3 days ago, Your Majesty, this is the situation. When the Turin was undergoing seaworthiness, only through Admiral Gorek's explanation did Carlo fully understand what was going on. When the Turin was undergoing sea trials, the Navy found that its hull rolled very severely in harsh sea conditions, which would seriously affect its combat effectiveness as an ocean-going warship. The most severe shaking occurred when the ship's hull rolled up to 21 degrees. Such shaking was impossible to achieve combat effectiveness. The Navy then urgently contacted 3 ship designers. Under their advice, all 3 new warships returned to the shipyard to prepare for the installation of bilge keels for anti-rolling. According to the design, the additional bilge keel is 63 meters long and 0.95 meters wide, mainly covering the middle section of the hull. One more thing needs to be said here. Due to the excellent power system, the Turin class speed is much higher than the design speed. During sea trials on the Turin, 2 4-cylinder vertical triple expansion steam engines were used under normal ventilation conditions at full power, and their explosive power was 16,340 indicated horsepower. Under conditions of forced ventilation at full power, its burst power was 19,782 indicated horsepower, allowing the Turin to reach a speed of 19.3 knots. However, after the 4-hour voyage, some of the boiler water pipes burst and leaked. Subsequently, the Navy lowered the maximum horsepower to 18,000 horsepower to ensure the safe use of warships in every sense. This battleship is an epoch-making masterpiece. Of course, this also requires good operation by the Italian Navy officers and soldiers. After all, no matter how sophisticated the weapon is, it depends on the performance of the user. Otherwise, the Prince's army in the next generation would not be disgraced by the Slipper army. Compared with equipment, the Wangai army can defeat the Slipper army with one hand. Here, as Admiral Gorek told him, Carlo felt relieved. Although he had already said it in the newspaper, he still believed what the Navy said personally. Now that it's explained, it's okay. But before the Admiral left, Carlo couldn't help but ask, "By the way, Your Excellency, Admiral, can the 3 warships be commissioned in the second half of this year?" "Your Majesty, the 3 warships will definitely be able to serve in the second half of the year. Then, the training of your officers and soldiers must be stepped up, as commanded." Chapter 200 Preparing for War. Negotiations with Britain moved quickly after Rome agreed In the end, Italy gained the acquiescence of the British by agreeing to withdraw from the Tano River basin in Kenya and ensuring the independence of Crete. Point of course, this does not mean that the British paid nothing. Italy demanded that Egypt under its control not allow the Ottoman army to pass, which was also agreed by Prime Minister Cecil. In addition, the two countries also have a secret agreement. When a war breaks out between Russia and the Ottoman Empire, Italy must ensure that it is consistent with the British attitude. Even if it is a declaration of war, Italy must also follow the British in declaring war with Russia. In some ways, the price paid by Italy this time was quite high, and it felt that it was tied up by the British in its diplomacy with Russia. But who would know that Russia never had the opportunity to declare war on the Ottomans? Except for the First World War, in which all countries participated. Except for a certain soul from later generations, everyone in the Italian government believed that this time Italy paid a high price to win the support of the British. After gaining the support of the British, Italy has basically achieved its goals in diplomacy, and then it needs to look at its own performance. During this period of time, preparations for war in Italy have continued. Various arsenals are working overtime to produce weapons and ammunition. In addition to changing their equipment, the intensity of training of each unit is also increasing. The Navy's various trainings are also increasing this year, especially after the 3 Turin-class ships were put into service in the second half of the year, named Turin, Palermo, and Berry respectively. The officers and soldiers on the ships are basically there is not much vacation time, and its officers and soldiers spend most of their time on warships. Speaking of the Turin class in service, there is another story. That is, after the British got 3 Turin class ships in service, they immediately compared their newly designed warships and were surprised to find that the Italian Turin class was different from their newly designed warships. There are high similarities in the monarchy level. This is not to say that the British suspected that the Italians had stolen their designs. According to the information they found, the other party started the design work of new battleships in 1886. To say that the theft was their own fault, but this will cause the new warships of the two countries to be very similar. In addition, the British also discovered that their own new warships would be at a disadvantage when facing new Italian warships. Although this disadvantage is not too big, it is still a disadvantage after all. This made the naval generals of the British Empire feel embarrassed. As the world's largest navy, it is unacceptable to be inferior to the Italians in new battleships, so the Admiralty approached Sir William White, the designer of this class of warships, and requested that the new warships still in the dock be modified, at least not worse than the Italian Torino class. Faced with the requirements of the British Empire's Admiralty, Sir William White got inspiration from the Turin class. The modification of the Sovereign class mainly changed the chimney, changed the horizontal row to a compact vertical row, and added a turret to the open-air main gun. There are some other changes, but after these changes, the two are more similar. Facing the changes made by Sir William White, the British Navy was a little depressed. It was difficult to choose whether to choose performance or face. However, in the end, performance was more important than face, so Sir's changed design was approved. In addition to the commissioning of the Turin-class battleships, public opinion also became unfavorable to the Ottoman Empire. After more than a year of slander through newspapers and other propaganda methods, it is not actually a smear. It just focuses on the customs that the Italian people are not accustomed to, and adds a few modifiers. At present, the Italian people have nothing to do with the Ottomans' good. According to survey statistics, 69% of Italian people currently dislike the Ottomans. This is a role of propaganda. You must know that 2 years ago, only 12% of the Italian people disliked it. This 57% increase is the result of continuous propaganda in the past 2 years. Faced with this situation, the Ottoman envoy to Rome, Actor Muhammad Mansu, sent a worried telegram to Istanbul to inform him of the current situation in Italy. Dear Grand Vizier Mustafa, I want to report something to you with a worried heart. The atmosphere in Italy is getting worse and worse, and the domestic newspapers and public opinion are very unfriendly to our country. For this reason, I met with the Italian Prime Minister. The Prime Minister of the Kingdom of Italy, Depretis, told me calmly that this was just a matter of some boring newspapers. Although the Prime Minister gave comforting words, this made me even more sad. I'm worried. I hope that, when the Grand Vizier reads this letter, His Majesty the Sultan will be on guard against Italy. Although this letter full of Mansu's thoughts was sent back to the Ottoman Empire, just like his respected Sultan Abdulhamid II, there was no further content. Sultan Abdulhamid II currently lives in the Yildiz Palace in Istanbul, and relies on the secret police to maintain his rule. It is strange that the Ottoman Empire could develop under such a rule. It can be said that compared with the European countries that are developing rapidly, the Ottoman Empire, just like its name, is really a sick man. Of course, this sick man still has some strength, so Italy still needs to prepare. When it comes to preparation, funding is essential. In order to raise funds, the Italian Ministry of Finance issued debts from the securities market under clever pretexts. According to statistics, this year the Italian government issued 650 million lira in government bonds. Don't think this is less. Last year, 610 million lira of government bonds were issued, and another 590 million lira of government bonds are expected to be issued next year. The large-scale issuance of government bonds has increased the discount on Italian government bonds by 3 percentage points, and the interest rate has also increased by 1.5 percentage points. With the annual coupon rate reaching 5.75%, there is no way to issue such a large-scale treasury bond. The underwriter and the purchaser must make profits. Otherwise, how can such a large amount be sold? Fortunately, Italy's economic situation has been pretty good in the past 2 years, which can give potential buyers a certain degree of confidence. Part of the money raised from the issuance of national bonds was used to prepare for war, part was used as funding for the subsequent war, and only a small amount was used for various government expenditures due to preparations for the war. Railway construction in Italy has been slowed down in the past 2 years, not to mention other construction. Now the government requires all departments to minimize investment in other projects, based on the principle of saving what they can. Therefore, various departments have also been very difficult in the past 2 years, and they can only open as few projects as possible. In this state of comprehensive preparation in Italy, the time came to 1890. I overslept yesterday, so I'm sorry I couldn't update. I'll make up for it tonight. I hope you don't mind. End of this chapter. Thank you very much for reaching the end. Don't forget to like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription, or donation encourages us to continue. Thanks to everyone. See you in the next video.